for December, oh, no, it's not December 6th. I'm obviously looking at the wrong one. It is the 29th of November. So you get it, yay! Thank you. For the 29th of November, and it is a joint meeting between the Regional Planning Governing Board and the Regional Planning Commission. This is a special meeting, so we will start by saluting the flag, and we're going to ask Mr. Abbott if he will salute the flag.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilman Abbott. And so now we will ask for a roll call.
All right, start with the governing board first.
Okay,
Marsha Burke-Bigler,
here.
Donald Abbott,
Here.
David Bobsey, Jenny Breckus, here. Charlene Bybee, Naomi Dewar, Vaughn Hartung,
Present.
Jean Herman,
Present.
and Ed Lawson.
Here.
All right, now on to planning commission. Peter Gower, Sarah Chavilicek,
Here.
James Barnes,
Here.
Larry Chesney,
Here.
James Fewens,
Here.
Ed Hawkins,
Here.
Frank Peterson, and I believe is Mary Brock here standing for
Here.
Frank? Perfect. Diane Vanderwell,
Here.
and Kevin Weiss.
Here.
And do we have a quorum of both?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do.
Okay. So, and Peter will be here at 3:30. At 3:30?
Yes. Until then, Sarah Joseph will be training for the RPC.
Okay, good. So I need a motion from the members of the governing board for approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And now I need a motion from the RPC.
And I need a motion from the RPC to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Alrighty. And now we have public comment. I don't have any listed public comment in front of me. Do you have any public comment?
I just have one for 5A, so not this item.
Okay. We will close public comment. We bring it back to the board for the business of the day. Madam Executive Director.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. So the business of the day, the item is for possible action by both bodies. Discussion and possible action regarding the 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan update. As you know, we have you here for a few hours so that we can spend some time together discussing the 4 development scenarios that we have talked about previously. We will be doing some exercises around that. We're also going to be talking about some governance pieces, excuse me. And
Please note for the record that Councilman David Bobsey has joined us.
thank you, Madam Chair. As well as some policy conversation. This meeting is agendized from 3 to 7 p.m. We anticipate, we have front-loaded the agenda in an effort to get the majority of things done in a shorter amount of time, and I can say, I do think we'll be able to get out early, which I imagine will be a popular action. So, what we have today is a variety of things for you to talk about and take a look at. As you know, we've spent quite a bit of time meeting with you and hearing your concerns, your issues, your desires around the regional plan update. And we have today both Mike Leeson and Terry Moore here with us to share some of the information and insights on the work that we've done. Additionally, as I mentioned, we have some development scenarios ready for you. We will be taking a break. We've got some food in the back as we stand up to do some exercises on maps around the wall. So do know that there will be a break coming probably in about an hour and 15 minutes. And if there are no other questions, I'm going to ask Terry Moore to step up and take us into today's presentation.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Councilors. Terry Moore for the record, and just really, I can see this, but
We're going to
we'll
be able to
look
see
at
it.
it. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So let me tell you what we're going to do today. We have 4 items that we're going to cover, a little bit of context, and then 3 substantive issues. Most of the time will be spent on the scenarios, and a little bit less time on policies, and a little less time yet on public engagement. Those are the 4 parts we have. And I'm going to start, and you have this in your packet, so I think you can just follow along with me if I have the same thing here. So start with the context, and so I'm going to take you back through what we've done and where we're headed. On what we've done, we've got you got the schedule in front of you. We've been working on this project for about a year. We've had a work plan in place since February, and the part that we want to illustrate is the main pieces that we have put together. Back in July, we talked to you, June, July, we talked about issues. The issues then resulted in goals in August and September. That developed into evaluation criteria that we got your approval on. And at the same time we were doing all that, we were working on scenarios. So I'm on a slide that looks in this small version like this, if you have that in your packet. The box shows you where we are now, that we're just about to close on the background scenarios and are then going to start moving into more detail on the policies and the writing of the plan. The logic that we've been using is the same. That's on the next slide, where we go from the idea of goals, what do you want for the region, to the issues on how well are we doing on getting what you want or don't want, and finally what policies we have so that we can get there. And that leads then to the products that we're aiming for, which is at the bottom of that page, the plan map and policies primarily, and then all the supporting documents that go with it. Just to give you a sense of where we are, there is text written about the plan itself. These scenarios that Jeremy will be going through are preliminary versions of what will be the plan map, and there is a lot of work done on all the supporting documentation. So there are about 6 or 7 chapters, all of which are at about the 80% level, and we'll bring up a little bit later. So this is a more critical issue for Jeremy, so I'm going to let you worry about it.
Yeah, we'll get there. We're going to get
You
there.
have to show maps. So I'm going to continue on since I just have text that I'm dealing with. So the next slide I'm on is where we go after today. And after today, we're going to create options for a preferred alternative. So you're going to look at these scenarios, tell us what you like and don't like. We'll take that direction and create a preferred alternative. And that preferred alternative will eventually become the plan map. We're also then going to bring back options for the supporting policies. So the plan and map itself is a policy, but there are a lot of other policies that you'll have with it on how you will, what you will do to try to ensure that plan outcomes are achieved. And then there's going to be some ongoing public involvement that will continue. And finally, we'll start on preparing the plan document and all the supporting technical work. So that's the first half of context. The second half of context is just to give you a little bit of framework on where we are here. And that's the slide here called Framework. And what we're going to what I'm talking about is a bunch of things in relatively rapid order on the purposes, authorities, obligations, and contents of the regional plan. So let me start with the plan itself. And staff's been doing a lot of work on this, and what the staff, we're almost there.
Yeah, where are you at, Terry? 6:20 on.
I am about a little farther down. Which of these will do it?
That arrow. There it is.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much. We're right here. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
So what we've been doing is working with your direction to try to support the decisions that the governing board and the commission have to make. So you're the decision makers. Ultimately, it's going to be your plan, but we have to do a lot of work on putting it together. So what we've been working on are what what the plan is going to be, and that is, what is it that you desire? So what is desired in the plan? What is it that is required in the plan? And what is it that is allowed in the plan? I mean, what are you allowed to do? So I want to just, as a framework, I just want to hit those points very quickly now. On the desired part, we have been listening to the board and the commission and a lot of other people. We've met with other local governments, the planners, the public. We've looked at other studies, and that includes things like studies that have been for TMRPA, like the Regional Sustainability Baseline Study, the Affordable Housing Study, things being done by Truckee Meadows tomorrow, the IBM study. There's a lot of stuff that we've looked at that is part of what we've been thinking about on what's desired. And in general, what we've heard from these two bodies is that you'd like to work regionally, that you want to have more choices about what you can do, and in particular, you want more and better tools. And specifically, what some of the things we've heard are about what issues you care about, and this issues go all the way back to last fall, talking to the RPC at that time. This is a graphic. Whoa, it does not show up very well, but that's one that from a workshop that we had with the governing board on what the issues were back in July and August. The issues, oh, thank you, much better. The issues piece then evolved into a goals piece. That if these are the issues, then what does that imply about the goals that we have? These, on the left-hand side, those are the 6 categories of goals that we're dealing with more specifically, and you have adopted the commission recommended and the governing board adopted with minor modifications this set of goals. That was done in August, September. So that kind of describes what is desired. You want to take care of issues, you want to meet certain goals. But then we decided to look at, as we should, what is required and allowed. And to do that, we went back to what we consider to be the fundamental document, the NRS. And it turns out that the fine print is important here. There's a lot of detail that we're going to leave to the attorneys to deal with. So I just want to kind of take it at a high level on our assessment of what's required. And what I'm doing now is I am going into the NRS, and this is 278-0274, and this says what is required in the regional plan. So, and what we did is we put it into 4 categories. We took all the requirements, said it's really about the type of growth that the region should plan for. Then it's about where the growth, where you should grow or not grow. And there are requirements about both of those things, or language about that. What should that growth and land development look like? So once you've decided where you're going to go, what's it going to look like? And finally, how will the regional government work together to achieve the plan's goals? That is a general statement. What we decided to do is to take you through a little bit more detail, not the specific language, but just to show you how that ties together. And Kim, I think at one point I know we have a graphic somewhere that shows this, and maybe we have a handout on it, I don't remember.
Terry, we do have a handout. It's contents of the regional plan and its objectives.
Okay.
And during the time where we'll be up and taking a look at things on the wall, we have the full NRS printed out and on the wall for you to take a look at.
Okay.
I think, Terry, everybody appreciated the fine print joke on the slide. When you
Well, that
showed me
wasn't a joke.
well, this morning you said it was a joke, but
Okay, so here, taking those, I'm going to take these 4 headings right here and take them one by one. So first of all, what types of growth should the region be planning for? That, what the language says in summary is the plan should forecast population and the resources needed to support that population growth. So that's in NRS 278-0274 subsection 1. The next thing it says is about where it should grow or not grow. And in subsection 3, it talks about encouraging development in older and developed areas before going prematurely to undeveloped areas. That's language in the NRS. And as far as where it should not go, it should not go into areas that you want to conserve, natural areas with natural resources. It wants to direct growth to other areas. That's in subsection 2. What should it look like? It should be different and implies mixed use, but compatible. It should be different types of development, but compatible. And that's in subsection 4. And very importantly, because it deals with a lot of issues that you've been telling us that you're concerned about, is that adequate public facilities and services of all types to support that development. And that adequacy needs to be demonstrated by relatively detailed facilities and service plans from all providers. And that's in subsections 5 and 8. And finally, how will the regional government work together to achieve the plan goals? And subsection 7 asks for regional coordination in general. And subsection 5 gets very specific about the public facilities part of this, the timing, financing, and delivering of a complete and adequate package of facilities and services to new development. And then subsection 6 talks about annexation and spheres of influence. So all of those things we look at as things that, some things that are required, but they also give some, they also imply certain authorities. And so that's the framework that we put together. And I'll summarize that in a few moments. But before I do, I want to bring Mike Gleason up and to talk a little bit, building off of those NRS requirements, about how he sees this fitting into regional leadership. Mike?
Thank you. Well, I've met many of you, but not all of you, so I'll give you a little background. My name is Mike Gleason. I've been in public management for over 50 years now. Managed 5 separate cities, Oregon, Washington, California, 3 counties. Have my own business, so that I know what it means to make payroll, and I know what it means to argue with government to get something done. So I'm not an apologist for government. But one of the fundamental questions that always comes up around these general plans is, why are we doing this? It'll work out. We don't have to bother ourselves with this. And the misnomer in that particular analysis is that you are the public trust agents for the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is everything we own collectively. In this particular community, you have about $80 billion of private wealth. Homes, cars, businesses, refrigerators. You correspondingly have, if that number is accurate, and we think it's accurate, you correspondingly then have $30 billion, about $25 billion of the Commonwealth. 35 billion. That's a significant number. You've accumulated it over 150 years. Most of the time when you buy something or build something, it doesn't disappear. And so you have to maintain that asset. And you have to match that public asset with the private asset. Otherwise, you're not fulfilling your public trust obligations. It is not an attempt to take people's authority away to use their businesses. And it's not an attempt to draw a lot of pretty maps and pictures and make a lot of notes about things. This plan will be different than the plan you've dealt with before, primarily because you're going to adopt a picture, a map of what's going to happen. And then because of some fine work by your staff, and it is fine work, I've seen this done in very few communities as well as this is done here, you're going to have a set of data points that will give you information about how much capacity we have in our stormwater system, how much capacity do we have in our hydraulic water system, how much capacity we have in our sewage system, what are we doing about transportation elements. And those, we will eventually build you a dashboard so that when you deal with the question of should we add it here, move it there, or not do it here, you'll be monetizing that conversation. And you'll be able to say things like, well, if we put it over here and we do these kind of things there, gee, that'll cost this. What would it look like if we do it over here? Now, it won't be so precise that it'll answer itself. You'll still have to make your judgments. It will take you out of the realm of kind of the, well, it ought to be dense, or it ought to be, you know, really pretty, or you'll get down to the facts of what is the Commonwealth and what you have to support. The Commonwealth, let's say it's 25 billion. If you are maintaining that thing so that you don't have service degradation, you should be spending about $1 billion a year in maintaining that, just to get it so that it isn't, your driving time isn't slowed down, your air is still good quality, your schools are available. That would cost about $1 billion. You're going to add 45, or approximately 45,000 units. That will cost you another $8 billion, in addition to what you have to do to maintain the thing. So you got basically $1 billion to maintain it, $8 new billion to go with it, and then you're going to have obsolescence and technology changes, which require you to add about another $500 million. How in God's earth can you do that? You've got three sources of money. You've got taxes, you've got user fees, and you've got OPM. OPM is going to be your biggest number. Other people's money. Other people's money is absolutely essential. You can't get where you need to go without it. Now the number I'm using is 33 or 25 billion is for everything. I mean, I'm talking the airports, the federal offices, the transportation system. I'm talking government with a big G, which is how people see us. They just see us with one big G on it. They don't see us as the city of Sparks or the city of Eugene or something like that. And they don't see us as just a county. And frankly, I don't think they should be obligated to do that. So this body here is the body that has the opportunity, and I must say the responsibility, to bring all of that big G into your vision and to make your decisions based on that. Now, I'll make this statement boldly. I can document it academically. If you choose not to plan, you will add to the cost of this system you're talking here, you will add an additional $1 billion of expense, which is wasted public money. I'll give you an example. I've given this example to some other people and you're getting tired of it, but it's a good example. I like it. When I was managing Eugene, we were building a freeway and we had to put a trunk line underneath the freeway. And for the city of Eugene, it was going to be 21 inches. And that's fine, we could afford it. Got it in the user fees, got it in capital improvements. But because we had a regional plan, and because we were going to put 10,000 people 10 years out, way out on the edge there, it had to be 48 inches. Now, the city of Eugene doesn't want to pay the 48 inches. That's somebody else's bill, thank you very much. And as a good city manager, I would point that out. But because we had a regional plan, and because we had an occurrence on how we were going to finance that, and how the proportions were going to be allocated, we obviously put in the 48 inch. Now, the difference between putting in a 21 inch and a 48 inch is de minimis. It's you know, it's a hole on a pipe. And the size doesn't make hardly any difference. But if you had to come back 10, 15 years and tear that whole thing up and put in the 48-inch pipe, you would have wasted the public's money. So the plan is an essential element of efficient and effective government. Now, the plan itself won't really do anything. It'll give you a bunch of documents, and it'll give you a bunch of history, and it'll give you a bunch of information. But you all have to do the doing. How do you go about implementing such a complex undertaking? Well, I've been through that knothole about 4 different times, and I've been consulting for a long time and helped people go through it in other places. So maybe I've got 10 or 15 locations to kind of work through this problem. What you have today is solutions around your facilities that are based on the needs of each independent unit. You went ahead and did what you needed to do for sewage, and you went ahead and did what you needed to do for fire, police, and ambulance, and whatever. But you're going to do it from the standpoint of the city of Sparks, or the city of Reno, or the county. And although you would realize that you've got to get together and you make these agreements, and then you try to figure out how they really work, and then you reapply them, and then everybody goes and tries to go to legislature so they can get their done, and somebody else can't get their done, and we don't like them because they didn't do that. That is absolutely typical. You are not unique in that at all. The reason that happens is because you are now in the top quarter of the largest metro areas in the United States. You're big, you're not small. This is not a mom and pop shop. And the problems you're trying to solve are wickedly hard. And they cannot be solved by individual jurisdictions. You can try all you want. What you're going to get is suboptimum solutions that are very expensive. Now, one of the strengths of the American system of government is we have lots of autonomous governments. It's also one of the weaknesses. We think we can present to you a decision-making model that will maintain your right and your authorities as independent agencies that are actuating your public's needs. But the standards and the decision-making process will be done on a regional basis with the players. That is, there's no plan to create another super authority that decides what happens to sewer, what happens to the water. What you'll end up having to do is call teams of people together, the experts that are in your field. You have very competent staff. Staff those experts, those technical people, with the necessary consultants and analysis so they can bring you back a regional solution set that meets their needs and meets the region's needs. And then you will promulgate on that. You will make up your mind whether or not that's the way we ought to take this on. And that will become the standard in the plan. So if you have a regional solution that you all agree to, let's use sewage for example, then you have a sewage system that you can say, yes, this area can be served, it's within our boundaries, it's within our time frame, it's consistent with what we all agree to. And you'll be able to update it and maintain it in such a way that it will support the non-degradation of service, which is the risk you get by not making that initial action. Now, using sewer as an example, I was telling some other people here, one of the probably things I don't want on my resume is I built 5 separate sewage treatment plants. So I know a lot of stuff about sewage plants that you probably wouldn't want to know. But one of the characteristics of a regional sewage system is that it is very complex. Every bit of water, from the brushing of your teeth to the combing of your hair, ends up at that plant. And one of the things you don't get to do is say, we're taking a day off today, don't send any more water. That plant will have to continue to operate, whatever, you got 5 plants. Those all have to continue to operate, even though you may be making different choices that'll be paying out over a 10-year period. And that's what the facilities plan is all about, is getting the best regional solution, the least cost option, and to maintain the service level you have right now while you put in another service level. That'll be true with streets, that'll be true with schools, that'll be true with water systems, that'll be true with storm drainage, which I happen to think is possibly a bigger problem for you than your sewage issue. You are not unique in these kinds of things, but if you can create that decision-making model, if you can become a convener of the decision-making, you will be unique. I don't think 1 in 20 of the regional associations can pull that off. It's a tough thing to do because everybody's so used to going back to what I call the zero-sum game. That is, we win, you lose. And you have to go to a sum-plus game. we win as a region when we agree on what it is we need to do. And then we decide who gets to operate what as a region, not by dictation. And then, this is where I'm going to go back to the OPM. You cannot believe how powerful it is. When the county commission of Lane County would go to Washington DC with us and meet with our legislators and give them the presentation that the city of Eugene wanted for capital improvements. And we would then give the presentation for Lane County. And the school districts would give their presentation for the community college, and so on and so forth. Because one of the things that happens when you get your regional plan in place is that you now have the ability to say, we need this amount of money and we got to go find it. And now where can we find this money? Everybody else will come at them in the disorganized way of zero-sum game. Give it to us, don't give it to them. And the legislatures hate that because they're put in a terrible place. One, everybody's mad because they gave any money away at all. Two, they're mad because you gave it to the wrong person. And three, they're mad because you gave it to them but not enough. When you walk in there with a signed, sealed deal, they can hardly contain their glee. And you will end up with a whole lot more OPM than you'll be, as they say, fighting way above your weight. I can attest to that. Billions in the Eugene metro area, not millions. And we're not sad about it. It's government money. It's public trust. I'm not going to argue whether we should be doing it the way they do it, but that's where it's at. You go get it. You're responsible for making these things work. Now, you can't solve any of these problems that we're talking about by the time you develop this plan. And you must start with the plan. The reason you have to start with the plan is all the facilities have to then follow that guideline. So if you don't say we're going to put it over there, then how do you know you don't need a 20-inch pipe versus a 48-inch pipe? So you got to go through that. And you have to go through the difficult statement of how do we want this pattern to lay out? But keep in mind that this is going to lay out over 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years. It's a primary difference between public and private enterprise. In a private enterprise, when I buy something and capitalize it, it better start making some money within about 6 months, or I got to get it off the books because it's going to eat my lunch. In the public side, when you buy something, it's there forever. I shared it with some people, don't ever try to close the park. I mean, you just cannot unload the capital inventory. You have to make it operate. You have to carry it in public trust, and you have to make it serve as efficient. There's nothing necessarily inefficient in your government service. That is a choice. You choose whether you're going to be efficient and effective. And the choice begins and ends with the elected and appointed officials. It does not begin and end with city manager. One thing city managers know for sure, at least this one knew for sure, when the council said jump, I wanted to know how high. And when the council said, I want some measurements around this production, I want some explanations and some guidelines, and I want to know that you're doing what we said we were going to do. That's oversight. My God, you're going to see a lot of efficiency come out of that. If you don't care, nobody says anything, or nobody really knows because nobody's really measuring anything, well, that's what you're going to get, and things will drift along. So you are starting in this plan to be very specific about what it is you want, about how you're going to go about measuring it, how you're going to go about deciding it. Then, as time goes on, you will get better at doing that. Your data will get better. It'll become a habit, and it'll become just the way you do government business, as opposed to the way you do it now, which is the old way. When you were a smaller city, the jurisdiction overlaps just weren't as great as they were. So that's my part. I'm going to come back at the end of this discussion and do more detail on the numbers. Because one of the things we'd like to change in this discussion is we want to monetize this discussion more than you have in the past. And we're going to show you how we're going to do that and how that will work out. Any questions, comments?
Just one.
Yes, ma'am.
I think maybe Nevada does not provide as much state assistance for infrastructure to local governments as perhaps you might be presuming.
Well, all states and all counties and all cities have been denuded of their capital, or the capital and operating funds, particularly in the general fund. That's just the way it is. They do have money, but they have it in different pots. So, and they have access to the feds. And every 10 years, just like clockwork, the feds jump up and say, oh my God, we're so behind in our capital infrastructure. We got to get the money out to the people that need it. We got to get it out the door right away. We want shovel-ready projects. Now, there ain't no such thing as a shovel-ready project, but you want to be ready as a team of people to jump on that bandwagon, because it's showing up. It's going to be here in about 2.5 years. And if you've got your feasibility work done, if you've done your preliminary analysis, you're as shovel-ready as anybody. You're way ahead of everybody. So that's how you pull it off. It isn't that there's just a whole bucket of money out there. You have to be pretty creative about, part of it might be working through the school system, part of it might be working through the community college. And those issues will start to appear, your opportunities will start to appear much more regularly when you start thinking of it as a region, or deciding as if you're a region. Yes?
Did you find that the projects were potentially under-engineered because of a lack of desire, a lack of funding, or just a lack of insight?
All of the above. If you are responsible for an agency, and these institutions are complex, as you well know, and you've got 1,000 different things that are pushing in on you, and comparisons and analysis you got to do, you're not really anxious to try to figure out the regional problem. So just, it would sure be nice if we could, but I've got to get this thing working for this community right here. So you engineer it to solve that problem, not the regional problem. The type of decision you would choose would be different if you're doing the region, but you don't have the authority, the responsibility, or even the money that you undertake. So you end up analyzing your particular problem through your particular lens, and then generalizing it to everybody else. And it doesn't generalize. That's the problem. And I've heard several people say, well, I know what we need to do with this sewage treatment plant. We had to do this, we had to open this, cut this one down. There ain't nobody in this community that I've met that knows what you want to do with that sewage treatment. You won't know what you want to do with that system or the stormwater system until you've done a thorough facilities plan with all of the participants, working through the problem with competent engineers, and then you'll decide the scheduling and the permitting and the programming. So, and that is, go ahead.
Well, one of the problems that I've seen, if I may interject here, is that the time that a plan starts versus the time that it's actually built. When they start the plan, it is sized properly, but by the time it actually gets on the ground, volumetrically, it's undersized and...
That's a mistake.
And
It should not happen.
let me tell you a place. Pyramid and McCarran, there should be a third lane that goes all the way from McCarran to minimum of Disc Drive, but most likely to Los Altos.
That may have failed because of OPM. Because that money comes through the feds, through your, we call it PSV, I don't know what you call it. And, maybe you didn't have enough horsepower to pull that lane in. I used to have the mayor of Portland.
I screamed at the top of my lungs, Mr. Gleason, saying, take that third lane to, at minimum, to Disc Drive, to the top of the hill. Not even, what would you estimate, Diane, half a mile?
But your voice would have been so much stronger had you been able to say, as a region, we have committed to this type of engineering and lane development out of that area for these reasons. And now you're talking for everybody. You're not just expressing your own point of view. And clearly you're expressing your point of view as a commissioner. It's a very important role, and it has significant weight, but it does not have the weight of the region talking. And that's what I mean about the OPM, is that when you go down there and talk about a region, it's an entirely different discussion. Because they have to consider the region. And they don't have to necessarily satisfy your point of view.
But what you did with your example, and then I'll leave this alone. With your example, you said that they wanted to put in a 21-inch pipe, but instead you sized it at 48 inches
Right.
for that future capacity,
right.
because you knew that that future capacity would exist.
And why did I know?
It's the way things work.
We had a regional plan.
Well, but
That's the only way
but
to do
beyond,
it.
but beyond that, and while I understand the regional plan, how did you know in your regional plan if the economy was going to turn up or turn down?
Well, we know that that plan is, as we used to say in the military, plans are good until you meet the enemy. You will be in a constant process of working through your utility processes and your decision-making and so on and so forth. But I would not have had the city council build that 48-inch pipe had I not known that in fact we were going to put 10,000 people out in that area. And I had no choice because the council would have scouted me for not doing that. That I was just absolutely not paying attention to my job if I didn't put the 48-inch pipe in. They are part of the plan and they know that that has to be put there. And they know that that particular element would be extraordinarily expensive, and that'll be true across the board. Now, did I perfectly know exactly how it was going to be 48? Not until we did the feasibility analysis. And although it was in the plan, it wasn't a feasibility analysis. We had to do the feasibility. Then we had to go out, do the construction contracts, and it came out something different. You know, that's just the nature of the business.
Terry, how many times have you seen forecasts change?
Oh,
Like always?
most of the time, planning is good enough at the municipal level now, at the county level, that most of the time it's the timing issue, not the where and the when.
I see.
And you definitely will get a swing in capacity and time and pace. That'll happen. In fact, I think one of the risks you need to start planning for is you might become the next there, and that is not pleasant. You can't tell
I
people
don't
not to
think it's
move into your
right.
town. And if all of a sudden you're growing at 5% compounded, you will be in a world of hurt. You ought to give that some thought, because you have all the characteristics that set that baby up. You'll be in a whole lot better space if you're working together than if you're just, flailing in the dark when they start coming. But
Thank you.
thank you. Terry?
Okay. Thanks, Mike. I won't try to summarize what Mike said, but let me tell you where I think we are. The setup here was, what is it that you desired? What is it that's allowed? What is it that's required? And it looks to us, our read of this is that what you desire is supported in the statute, and some of it is required, and all of it is allowed. The second bullet is the one that I think is the important one, and that is that our read is that you have, by you I mean the governing board with the RPC, you have, through the TMRPA creation and the NRS, you have the powers that you need to do more to manage development, powers that most other regions lack. And Kim mentioned before Mike McKeever, he's been here to talk to you. I'll remind you that Mike has a position like Kim's in the Sacramento area and other places. Mike would get on me if I didn't say this yet again, which is that he looks at that TMRP ordinance and goes, where did this come from? I mean, this is so strong that I had no idea that anybody else had this kind of authority. So, there were some visionary work on that, and I don't know the details, but long time ago, Senator Raggio and others, put this thing together, and that's what you've got. You've got strong authorities. And in our opinion, everything that we are thinking of proposing for your consideration, not, you won't adopt it all, but everything fits within the powers that you have right now. Or another way of saying it is, we don't think there's anything that you need to go back to the legislature for to do the kind of things that we're talking about and that Mike's talking about. So what we want today, what we hope to do today is to get a little bit more direction from you on the plan and the policies you want. And the way we're going to do that is Jeremy's going to come up now and take you through the next round of the Jeremy show on, on scenarios. And he has done a lot more work. And after Jeremy's done, we're going to give you a break and let you move around and start saying what you like and don't like. And then after that part's done, we'll come back to a little bit more on policies, and Mike will come back up again. So, Jeremy?
Okay.
Before you leave, Terry.
Yeah.
So you're proposing that the regional planning has the authority over the cities in the county?
I guess I want to be careful on how to say
What
it.
it
I'm saying,
suspiciously sounds like.
yeah, I'm saying, well, I'll say what Mike said. You have the NRS gives to these bodies the authority and the requirement to make sure that there is adequate public facilities and services, which are defined very broadly. Everything that you can name is included. And that the adequacy is up to you to decide what that means, but it is based on detailed facility plans. So on the assumption that what Mike is talking about, which is you have detailed facility plans that says this is what we want. And if you get to that conclusion and you say, this is the plan, this is where growth is going to go because this is where we can supply facilities, and somebody comes in and says, on the private side, I want to do it here, and one of the public governments, the local government says, we want to do it there too, and the there is not where the regional plan says it's going to go, then yes. The regional plan has the authority to say that is not compliant with the regional plan. And, that's...
But let me speak to that just slightly different, because I think it's an important twist. Nobody has authority over anybody. These institutions are as independent as hogs on ice. And that is true in every institution I've ever worked in. When you try to get them to go one direction, they're going to go the other. What you need to do is to be the convener. You have the responsibility to make this match with the public assets, and you need to work so that it serves both cities and the counties and the school districts and the water agency and all of those needs. It can be done, it really can. But if you get into, we're going to make you, you're not going to get there.
That's what I'm saying. We're elected locally.
That's right.
This board is funded by the three entities.
Exactly.
So if
This
they
board,
decide no more funding,
this board,
show's over.
and this board must serve those agencies.
So how do you walk that line of not having authority over the local jurisdictions without creating an ordinance, but a plan is,
Well,
I mean, to me, there's I'm confused on all
all
of
right,
this.
let me try this, because this is.
I'm not willing to give up our autonomy
Oh, no.
as Sparks, and I
No.
don't think Reno or Washoe County wants
No,
to.
and nor should you. I mean, it is, I think, a travesty. I do not like comprehensive governments or consolidated governments. I think they're terrible. The character of the community, the character of how the area grew up is embodied in these institutions, and your trust is set up around all of that, your public trust. What you need is a tool for making decisions. That is better than running off the legislature and trying to stop with somebody or going to the court. What you need is to come together and say, we've got a sewage problem that is regional. It involves 5 plants. All the players own part of these plants. What if we sat down together and worked out with a competent support that they could hire, what would be optimum over the next 20 years? And then work out, as you were discussing, how are you going to keep this in place as you make those movements? Because you don't just get to turn the switch. That is a habit that you guys are not used to. And I shouldn't say that. That's an overstatement. In fact, you did a very good job around the water system. And most of you think this is a pretty good system. The difficulty is if you do everything like you did with the water system, is that now you have 15 or 20 of these things, and you will never get it back, those cats back in that sack. And you'll be Sacramento or San Francisco. So, not that that's bad, I didn't suggest that was bad. So it is your commitment on this board to insist that we have, or to insist that we have workable, understandable facility plans that then make the statement of where you can develop. And if you don't get to develop there. And that's a powerful issue.
How about where and when?
Well, but yeah, it is where and when, because you're going to have tranches in there, and you're going to have schedules in there. It's not, hell no, we're not going to get there till 60 years from now, don't talk to us. It's doable, but it does have, it's some plus. It is not a zero game.
Mike, could you also maybe talk a little bit about this? You've used the term convener. Could you talk a little bit about what that looks like? Because my understanding when you've described it in the conversations that we've had is no loss of autonomy for the local governments. This is, as you say, it's a place to, this board and this planning commission, it's a place to bring together subcommittees, right?
Yes.
To develop subcommittees. And that's part of something that is listed in NRS, to come together and develop these plans. So if you could talk about that a little more.
Convener is, just a word, but what it would, and it could look, you're not going to get all this done by the time you get this plan adopted, but you would put into your work plan, and that's one of the things we're going to suggest that you put into your planning document is an ongoing work plan. You would put in there, how are we going to set up, convene, if you will, a forum using the expertise that you have in Sparks and you have in the county and you have in the city, having a technical team, probably a policy team, and they would report back to you, and they would be able to hire competent consultants to give them the necessary analysis if they don't have the resources themselves. And that convening then will produce a document that says, it's got to be here and here and here, it's going to take 20 years, and it's going to cost $6 billion, and whatever it does. And you all are going to look at that and say, yeah, or no, change this or change that. And then you're going to go back to your city and your county, and we're going to say, this is what they're going to put in the plan. Can we live with it? Yes or no? Okay, we can live with it. Let's go. That means you all have to raise the rates together. It means or at least raise them in such a way that it makes sense, and you'll all have to get on the financial bandwagon, or you don't get a sewage plant. Okay, that's it.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, certainly.
So at the governing board retreat in, I believe, late August or September, at the restaurant, Mike Leeson was not yet on the team. Terry was there, and he showed a picture previously of the issues that were identified. And there was a lot of conversation in the room at that meeting around being able to make decisions around infrastructure, think about infrastructure regionally and make those decisions together. And we came out of that meeting, and Terry said, I know exactly the right guy that we should talk about who did this in a very similar area that had 2 cities and a county. And we should talk with him about what the potential and opportunities are. And that was Mike Leeson. So what Mike is has described today is in response to what we heard in terms of issues both at the Planning Commission retreat last November and also at the August-September Governing Board retreat earlier this year.
Yeah, but I do think all authorities still maintain their authority. But if you hold out or you just don't want to join the club, then where are you going to get the water? Where are you going to get the sewer? What are you going to do with the storm drain? Because the only other way to get there is to continue on the suboptimum approach, where it's zero sum, we'll get ours at the expense of yours. And then, of course, the reverse happens just as fast.
One of the things that, if I may, Madam Chair, jump in
Certainly.
here and just say, Mike, that until regions figure out how to flip the funnel and turn water issues and wastewater issues and stormwater issues into assets and not liabilities,
Yeah, exactly.
it never gets done.
That's right.
Treat effluent as an asset. Treat it to such a high standard that it becomes an asset.
That's,
Take your storm water and capture it and push it back down into your aquifer so that it becomes an asset.
see, all of those things are open to you when you start the collective discussion of how do we want our region to use these resources. When you look at it from the city manager, city of Eugene, I can't have that conversation because I'm not responsible for the county, And so the only way I can have that conversation as a representative of the city is through some kind of a regional decision-making process. It took us, I've seen this we did it in Walla Walla, we did it in Eugene. I've seen it in 4 other places, or I've participated in putting it together in 4 other places. It's world-class hard. This is not simple. And everybody's going to want to fall back into their own old processes because that's what you're trained in. That's what you're used to. That's just, and so you're going to have to continue to encourage and discuss. But as soon as you get one of these things under your belt and can kind of celebrate that, then the next one will be a whole lot easier. And it won't seem quite so, my God, they're going to take away our ability to do the things that we've been charged to do with. Because you'll still have the authorities to say, nope, we're not playing with you.
But I think the point is, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that we can't do any of that until we get this plan in place.
You've got to have the plan in place because you can't answer the questions you were just raising, treating this all of the water as one, until you decide where the plumbing's going.
Okay. Jeremy?
All right. So it's been an hour. This might take a while. Do you guys want to take a 5-minute break? Maybe,
No, that's
just power through? Awesome. Okay. All right, well, I'm Jeremy Smith, the GIS coordinator at TMRPA. For the record, very happy to be here, not only at this meeting, but also here in having actually created 4 scenarios with housing units, deployment, and an almost full suite of metrics that we'll talk about today. So very excited to get this far. It's been a journey. And the technical difficulties that we experienced earlier are just par for the course today. All day long. It's been just technical difficulties. So the fact that we're here and this stuff's on the wall.
I thought we were talking about a project on Keystone. I kept saying Keystone.
Keystone. Oh, they did. Yeah, exactly. It had that shape. It needs a little focus. What do you guys think?
Yes, please, thank you.
This operation is unavailable. I see.
Unavailable.
Unavailable.
Focus on require a regional decision.
Yeah, I made it. All right.
Yeah,
There it is.
that's
All right. Okay. Cool. All right. So you may remember that we have 4 scenarios. We're creating 4 scenarios of the future. Some of these slides you've seen before, but I want to reground this in what we're up to here. We don't really actually believe that any of these 4 are the real future, right? We are trying, in fact, to make these scenarios different enough from each other. We've made them different enough from each other. I can actually say that now. That's pretty good. We've made them different enough from each other that we can see differential impacts in growing one way versus another. We're hoping that after this exercise, this talk, and we do a little walk around, check them out, we'll get the first inclination from you all about how we can blend these futures together to create the plan map that Mike and Terry have been talking about, the actual physical manifestation of where we're going to go. And hopefully the metrics that we've been able to come up with will help us to understand why we would choose one over another. Briefly, to go through the 4 scenarios, the first one is called Classic. That is over here, Station 1, we'll call it. That's the historical pattern. So if we were to build just like we did over the past 20 years or so, what would we get in the future? Try to mimic that pattern. The second station, the McCarran scenario, that is very similar to Classic in the sense that we're kind of going under a similar development priority lens, except for one important caveat. We have pushed 25% of the new growth into the McCarran ring. So that's really trying to densify in a small core area. Those are from the housing study we did a couple of years back. So we brought those back to life. We took out anything that had already developed, and now you have sort of what's remaining from that in those. 2 new scenarios. Scenario 3 is called Smart Greenfield. This is a concept where we understand that greenfield development is part of the game. Is there maybe a way we can do things a little bit differently to maximize the investments we've already made with regard to infrastructure? And so we've really focused heavily on that one and looking at proximity to existing infrastructure in greenfield areas. And then finally, scenario 4 is the infill scenario, sort of a classic planner take on trying to put development into areas that have already been developed or that are closer to the core of our community. In all cases, with some slight exceptions, we have followed the existing zoning and the master plans of the City of Sparks, Washoe County, and the City of Reno. These are really realizations of your master plans. But we know that inside the TMSA, which is the black line you'll see here in a second, some of the maps, we have a lot of capacity, more capacity than we need for land in the next 20 years. And so there are different ways that we can realize the future, and that's what we've tried to do here.
Jeremy, can I ask a question?
Please, yeah.
So we had a 3-hour hearing last night on the
Yeah.
project. And
Fun.
one of the arguments that was made in favor of the project was that we didn't have enough land, at least aggregated in a way that, let's say, a big developer that wants to do 5,000 homes at a time versus 500 homes could work with. And I was told, I'm sure other council members were told in separate briefings, that we were kind of done. And I asked the question, well, what about after this 5,000? Where do we go after that one? They go, well, you're done then. I said, so you want your 5,000, but then you're saying we're done anyway. And it was pretty much that. And so I got kind of confused. I didn't know if what we're done with is thousands of, homes at one clip from their perspective. They viewed the 80,000 units that you say we have. Most of them they dismissed as non-existent, or maybe in 2s and 3s, like 2 homes and 3 homes, not 200 homes and 300 homes and 1,000 homes and that kind of thing. And so I got a little confused. I just while you're on that statement, that we have all these units and we have more than enough land to ever go, and there's other people out disputing that. And not just this particular developer, but some of their advisors as well that deal with folks with money, folks with different style of developments. And so with that.
Well, I've looked at the information from the perspective of the assessor's parcel database many times over. And we have done lots of work going through published on the internet and adopted plans, planning developments, tentative maps. We've gone and looked at this stuff multiple times. And there is vacant land, and it is entitled for a number of units. It could be that someone else owns the land, and they're sitting on it, right? And some developer can't get into that development because it's just sitting out there, and they're holding on to it. And so it's not moving on the market, per se. But the potential is absolutely there in every time I've ever looked at it.
Because I kind of asked them that. I said, it's there, but you can't have it because it's in somebody else's pocket.
Maybe.
Or it doesn't exist in the quantity to do a certain style of development. We approve Stonegate. That's a lot of houses.
Right. That's
a big development. This is was even bigger development, right? I think that was 4,000. This was 4,700 homes or units. So that's one issue. Is maybe it doesn't belong to them.
Correct.
They would like to have it.
Yes.
So can you say more about this? Is that the main thing?
I think that may be the main thing. I mean, I'm always happy to, we could go download it off the internet right now. And even without any of the work that I've done and the folks at TMRP have done to look through and assign specific zoning to some of these areas that are kind of, they might just say PUD in the assessor data, it's available online. I mean, there is vacant land. And if you do a calculation, the calculation we do is we take the size of the parcel. If it is, say it's approved, it's an acre, it's approved with zoning for 4 units per acre, right? We will say, okay, we know it's 1 acre. First we check to see if there's hills or lakes or streams or anything constraining it on that land. We would subtract that acre, right? So maybe now we're down to half an acre because the stream runs through there. So now we can only fit 2 units, right? And in fact, then to calculate that capacity that I get to, we further break that down to an 80% factor. So we would only get 1.8 units off that land with the existing zoning. So we're actually trying to be pretty conservative. Yeah, about how we approach it, because things don't necessarily always build out to their development potential. Although we have seen that in areas that are zoned very high density, when we did the housing study, those seem to overdevelop from their potential even, whereas the large lot stuff seems to kind of remain very low density.
Okay, well, it was hard to know who to believe. I'll be honest with everyone. You know, you say yes, they say no.
I believe the Washoe County assessor.
Okay.
So that's where I get my source from, and
You mean the office, right?
what's that?
You mean the office, right?
The office of the
Yeah.
assessor.
The office of the assessor, you're absolutely correct, yeah.
Database.
And there's a lot of people there, and I mean, and the data they provide, you know? Yeah. And I mean, it's there, so I couldn't do the work that I'm gonna show you if there was no capacity to build the units into. I wouldn't build them into.
Well, I thought I better ask the fundamental
Yeah.
question because literally I have been told over and over, we are done. After this particular development that people are advocating for, you got nothing else. You are dead in the water. I mean, literally, I'm sitting there, and if you don't approve this, you have, you know, ruined the future of the Reno Sparks area. That kind of idea.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
Well,
Well, it was fairly, well, but it was fairly heartfelt from them.
Sure.
That they believe that. I'm not, and they have a range of consultants that say it differently, but
okay.
I was just struggling to understand what reality is.
And within that number, Jeremy, that does include various planned unit developments that have not been built.
That's correct. In fact, yeah, Spring Mountain, for example, is a good one that takes 12,000 units right off the top. It's the one that's far to the north, and so you could take those off. But in fact, that is currently on the books. That I say, you know, and it's something that could happen if infrastructure were to be, you know, put out there. But that's what this is about. Do we
Okay.
want to put infrastructure out there, right, or not? So I think we should sit down together, and I want to show you.
Yeah.
You know, right in the nitty gritty.
Okay.
Okay.
Jeremy,
Okay, yeah.
this is right on point. When you have the database and the plan, you won't get buffaloed by people that have a whole different agenda. And I'm not suggesting that you were buffaloed.
Well, in fact, we turned it down.
Yeah, it just,
Despite the dire prediction.
there's all kinds of rumors that go on about, you don't have this, you don't have that. If you have the database that these guys have set up, you'll be able to answer that question.
Okay. And we all put our trust in it. We believe in it as a common good, and this is our database.
Yeah, I mean, I have
We
no
understand
reservation.
You can explain it.
Yeah.
We can ask them to go to it.
Sure. In fact, a lot of this PUD stuff are units in the shapes that encompass where those units are. That is available online on our website, and you can go there, and you know that'd be a good place to start if you wanted to refute it.
Well, obviously, I believe Jeremy more than them. He's our guy, right? And so I had to put at least, say, even if 80,000 is wrong, there's at least 40,000 units, you know?
I can't keep those. Terry, do you have a comment?
Just one thing to add, Commissioner, that I've done a lot of this kind of work. I think I understand the question you're asking. And it doesn't take an assumption that the private sector is lying or ignorant to make this work out. What I've observed is that they are implicitly saying, I know what's out there that I can buy at what prices. And this other stuff, I don't know what your assessor database is saying or what entitlements you have given. All I know is that I'm not seeing land in quantities that I want at prices that I want.
That was exactly what they were saying.
Yeah, so that, but, and that may be true. So when
True,
when
yes.
Jeremy's doing his work, he's saying, I think accurately, we have entitlements out there that amount to this. If all of those entitlements are in places where there is no infrastructure, and you take Mike Gleason's point of here's what you have to do to get the infrastructure, the developers may be right that in fact those entitlements aren't really worth very much. But that, in the context of this plan, that's what we're trying to get our arms around and to help solve, and to say, well, let's let people that have those entitlements know that they are in, for example, a second tier of development that we will only get to at some point, and then see what the first tier land is, and we may be short on first tier land, in which case, where are we going to expand the infrastructure? But if we have a limited amount of money, we're not going to expand the infrastructure everywhere at the same time. We're going to focus it somewhere. So that's really the crux of what we're trying to
And
do.
I'm really glad you said that, because it really was, both things are true. You are correct, and they are correct
Yeah.
from their perspective. You know, that's how I viewed it. But we were, you know, elected to make these hard decisions, and we had to take it all into account, you know, so, okay.
Okay, well, so starting with with the assessor data, really is our start point, as I mentioned. To pull off these 4 scenarios that we've created, there were 3 main processes that we had to go through. The first was to try to understand what are the characteristics of the land that sort of affect the developability of that land. So 2 things. We looked at where is infrastructure, where are the slopes, where are the water bodies, how far are you from transit, this kind of thing. Then, once we had a feel for that, and I'll show you a little more of that, we went into the allocation mode. Now we have a target, how many units are we going to put on the landscape? That's the next step. And then once we put the units on the landscape, we've finally gotten down to the 3rd tier where we can say, okay, what does it mean? What does it mean in terms of students going to one school versus another? Or wastewater going to one treatment facility or another? These are geographic problems. So those are the 3 steps. We talked about this. This idea of characteristics that affect development. I think that's at the heart of this we're both right kind of idea. And I would say that this is a model, right? What I put together is completely a model, and I believe all models are wrong because they're just these representations of reality, right? But they can be useful. They can help us to understand things. So the first, these characteristics that affect development, we were able to put 47 things together, 47 different things across categories like transportation, schools, water, wastewater, into a 40-acre hexagon framework that covers the TMSA. And the reason to do that is just to sort of fuzzify, really, because we don't really, I never want to stand up here and say that I know in 5 years that parcel is going to become a rec center. Or, this parcel will be a Walmart. I don't know that, right? But we do know that there's an interplay between what's in the ground, what the site is like, and what probably has a little bit more temporal viability than something else. And so that's what this development characteristics spreadsheet aims to get at. And what you end up with are development priority lenses, is what I decided to call them this time. But we have 2 that we've been working with. On the left, you see infrastructure proximity. Anywhere that's blue, that is close to our trunk sewer lines, our trunk water lines, our major roads. But you can see it's a pretty splayed out pattern. That's what's driving the underlying kind of priority of where we're going to allocate units in the smart greenfield scenario. Contrast that with the one to the right, the live, work, play scenario. This is where we looked at, okay, where are the parks? How close are you to downtown? Do you have bus routes? How frequently do they come around? What about jobs? So those are the 2 different lenses that we wanted to use to direct this temporal aspect of where would development happen first. And that's specifically for scenario 3, smart greenfield. That's the one on the right. I was driving that. And then the infill scenario, this lens on my left is driving that. This is impossible to read, but it's just pointing out that in that spreadsheet we used, well, I guess it's not that bad actually, certain factors to come up with that infrastructure proximity. We used certain factors from the spreadsheet to come up with the live, work, play scenario. And in fact, Washington County actually decided to play along with this, and I know the city of Reno and City of Sparks are going to try this too. And any of you that want to do this, we tried to get it online, and then technical difficulties. Our 7-year-old GIS server decided to fail. And so we have this in-house, and if any of you are interested in poking this a little bit deeper, please come over and we can set up a time that we can actually run this tool. You can run different iterations of these priority lenses in about a minute each. So we could look at many different ways. If we say, well, let me just show me the parks. I want to see what it looks like if everybody gets to live by a park. And we can see what that looked like in terms of that geospatial framework. So we'll send an email to line that up. Okay, so that's the characteristics side. We've kind of been through that a few times. That's the light bright, showed you that before. And so now, allocation, that really you have to understand what's coming down the pipe, right? And the way that we understand that is something called the consensus forecast. We've talked about that before as well. We bring together 4 disparate, or independent rather, forecasts of the future, and we basically just average them. And what that tells us right now, we just did it this year, is that we can expect on the order of around 107,000 new residents in Washoe County over the next 20 years. So that translates with some math into about 43,207 new units. That became my target number for housing units in each of the scenarios. So when you look at these scenario maps, I have built on the ground, theoretically, 43,207 units. Also around 80,000 jobs, and I actually got that up there too.
Jeremy, that's over how many years, I'm sorry?
Over 20 years.
Over 20.
20 years, yeah. And it's just for Washoe County. So when you think about jobs, if 80,000 jobs doesn't seem like a lot of jobs, I know that in the RTC model, for example, and working with Story County, they've given us an additional 30,000 on top of that are going out to the Tri-Center. That's their forecast, and I was just taking it for what it's worth and put it in there. So how do we get to this allocation? There are really 4 kinds of land that we've been able to turn on. By far, the biggest is vacant land. But we also have this concept of underutilized land. You can redevelop land. And then there's this little thing we did to try and experiment on the smart greenfield scenario to actually upzone, create density in some of these greenfield areas that is not approved today. And so we know that's the one time we stepped outside of sort of what is zoned and master planned right now. But that was in an attempt to see what those impacts could be, just informational really. And up top there, that first bullet is also very important. So we have to think in terms of, we have 5 neighborhood categories. That's a spatial footprint that you can see on all the maps, and the next slide will show you. And also 5 different housing types by density. We've talked about these before too. There's a low density housing type, medium density, then there's like a middle category, kind of regular garden apartment, kind of 3-story apartments, and then fountain house and upwards in the very high density classes. So there's 5 density classes. But there's also these 5 neighborhood types. And these may be a little wrong around the edges. I did this, and I tried my best obviously to capture it, but number 1, in the master plans we identify mixed use land use. So the darkest grand hexagons, those are corresponding to where we've said we want mixed use. The orange areas, that's really our established neighborhoods. These are neighborhoods that when you look at the aerial image, and you see what's there and the parcel data too, it's mostly built, right? There are some vacant chunks, but a lot of it's built. And then we have in the lightest blue, which is kind of hard to differentiate from the gray, but really employment-centric lands. These are lands that don't have very much residential in them at all, don't have a lot of residential zoning for the future, and they're just employment-specific. Then the dark blue. These are the areas that you can find on our PUD map viewer online. They're the spots that we've said, these are areas we're going to entitle for future growth. Evans Ranch, there's the new Stone Gate there, just crossing 395. Finally, we have rural land in the gray. And so there's actually quite a bit of that gray rural land where there's very low density housing or no housing at all, just sagebrush. And obviously, probably no infrastructure either.
Could you just say it one more time? So the blue developing, you said Stonegate at the top is like,
yeah, can you?
I can see.
Can you see Stonegate there, kind of up
On the
there?
left.
Yeah. And then Mortensen Garson out near Bird Eye, that
That's
dark
what I wanted
blue.
to ask next.
Yeah.
So that's Martin Garson. At the bottom, is that Redfield, the blue? Or
The very bottom is Sierra Reflections and St. James area.
Oh.
Inside Washoe County's portion.
And then the blue on the far right is?
Down Damani.
No, up north.
Oh, some stuff in Sparks. We've got Kylie. There's Copper Canyon. Some of those things up there. And then there's some developments up in the Washoe County portion of Spanish Springs as well. I can't remember all the names. That's why I have a database.
And this is, the outline is the TMSA.
The TMSA, yes. And there are a couple of chunks of TMSA, Warm Springs, which is up Pyramid Highway, and then even further up is the Spring Mountain chunk.
That's what I was going to ask.
But anytime I model this stuff, none of that stuff, with the exception of a few lots in Warm Springs, ever really turns on. So, yeah. So I don't show it because it makes it overcomplicated, and this is an easier picture to understand it.
Jeremy, do rural areas correspond directly with development constraint areas, or they're just areas that happen to be undeveloped?
There are probably constraints in them. They typically tend to be towards the edges, so the slopes tend to increase, but they're not a one-for-one by any means. The DCA areas are a subset of the rural areas.
You can see the south side of the line.
Yep. And up the hill there, that little square, or what's going on, in that northeast portion of Sparks. I mean, there's some slopey areas up there, but there's also areas that are certainly flat enough.
Well, we have the opposite. We have the floodplain in our the big gray area.
That's true, yeah, down by the airport there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And then the other part's steep slopes, so.
So Jeremy, they're not rural by zoning. In other words, 20 acre minimum, 40 acre minimum. They're just
They're rural by,
nature.
correct, they certainly don't have an entitlement, like a tentative map active or a PUD. But they could have zoning that's, you know, certainly less dense than 1/40, but a lot of it is 1/40.
Okay.
Is all of this privately owned or privately held, or is some of it still in the public trust, BLM land?
Some is federal land, yes, and that would be constrained though. We would not build on federal land.
Right.
So our strict constraints that we always remove from any vacant parcel that we
Right,
allocate to.
which could potentially be designated as your gray or your silver as rural areas.
Within that, there certainly is some, yes, absolutely.
Jeremy,
Yes.
I had to step out and I apologize.
No worries.
Is the, what's known as the Mortensen Garson area, which is kind of a, you know, it's just showing there as blue and gray, so it's kind of like, there it is, you know?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Is it, by virtue of the settlement agreement, what makes it a developing area? Because I know no
Yes.
sewer to be there, no water to be there, so,
Correct.
you know, you could take one analysis and say, how's that a developing area?
We treat it as a developing area because it has SF9 zoning,
Uh-huh.
which is a pretty high density zoning for
Yeah.
at the edge. And so it's
Yeah.
not a PUD per se, but I mean,
Yeah.
it sort of gets treated, at least we've treated it that way, but it is slightly different. It's good to point out.
But with all the emphasis we heard in the earlier part of today about the facilities and how the
Yes.
regional plan really focuses on facilities,
Right.
wouldn't a better way to look at this, look at availability of services presently? And then in that area might fall out. I missed that?
Next slide.
Possibly. So
Okay.
this is how we
Yeah.
start, by
Yeah.
creating these
Okay.
priority lenses.
Okay.
And I think you can see that it's very yellow down
Yeah.
in those
Yeah.
chunks. That means that it's not near infrastructure. So that's guiding.
Do you have a kind of thing where things are counterbalanced like that? You may have the zoning like Evans Ranch or Silver Sweat, whatever that one is up there.
Silver Knolls or
No.
Silver Star Ranch.
Yeah, they have the
Silver Hills
PUDs,
also.
but they're very far away. Do you have like a map that shows those areas that have that disconnect?
Well, in these cases, we have, if they have an entitlement, we've made them a developing area.
Yeah,
But as we go through and look at where infrastructure is, and that's part of what guides, you know, the front end of this. But also, we don't have specifically in this analysis that overlay, but I have done it before.
yeah.
And when I've done that before in the housing study, we could go pull that up. I believe it was around 60,000 units were in kind of a cloud area that had major roads, major water, major sewer
Had it all.
lines.
They had the zoning and the infrastructure
Correct.
to be
Yes.
really the key developing areas.
Correct. Yes.
So, because she's getting at chicken and egg, one has zoning but doesn't have infrastructure, one has some infrastructure options, no zoning.
So the way we're approaching it is that we're letting these features happen so that we can see what the differential impacts would be. And one impact would be, what is the cost to serve it? And the cost to serve it would include the provision of capital infrastructure. And what I think we need to get to is from this model, where we have imperfect information, to what these guys have been talking about, which is this gets us through the planning process, but then we get together and we really bring the facility plans together and do exactly that. That is not currently possible. Now, I haven't been able to do it anyway, because there's just disparate ways that these facility plans are managed, tracked. They're not in GIS format. It's not the mandate of the folks that do them to even talk to me, really. You know, I guess it is if we talk about our authority, but so far it's hard to get that all together. So I think what we're trying to do is build this imperfect thinking machine that allows us to conceptualize these kind of concepts, put them together, see where we have mismatches or we have alignments, and then understand also the differential impacts, so that we can say, okay, this seems like a good place to go. It could be that this doesn't seem like a good place to go because it's more expensive or whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
Taxes are
just the
schools.
concern I have is
Yeah.
that the Reno City Council has inherited a lot from the Reno City Council that was before with the trench and other things. I don't like to throw bombs at people before,
Right, no.
but there's several PUDs that are hanging out there, and just because at one point 4 people said yes to this, yes to that, doesn't mean it's divine providence.
That's right.
In terms of your modeling takes it there.
because those never have to open up. They're entitled, but there's always, getting those to tentative is always going to be the ability of the investment decisions that the Reno City Council makes or the regional entities that provide those services. And I've been concerned that your modeling starts to put precedent on those as terms of Providence rolling out.
Understandable. And it's really an attempt to find out what it would do if those turned on. Not give them Providence, but in fact, potentially say why it would be a really bad idea. It could go both ways.
Or premature, you know.
Or premature.
If we're in a 20-year
Yes,
time
that's right.
horizon, Evans Ranch is 40 years out.
This is exactly what we're trying to achieve with this process.
Okay.
We're trying to find out where is the right 20-year boundary.
Yeah.
You got it. Yeah, Terry.
Just one, I'm not sure that this will help, and you tell me, I guess I need your clarification that it's right, but I think it is the case that these existing neighborhoods are there as a way of understanding the data.
Yes.
And, where does growth go, as opposed to a method of allocating. The allocation is based on the infrastructure and a bunch of other stuff. So the question then, I think, that gets asked is, how, given the infrastructure proximity and the way the model's working, how much of that gets allocated to places that have entitlements?
In fact, we did exactly this. So in our two new scenarios, the smart greenfield and the infill, which we'll look at, we made the very sort of direct decision to say, okay, in the smart greenfield, we are going to turn on 65% of the new growth in the outlying areas, the developing areas and the rural areas. And 35% will happen in the existing or established neighborhoods and the mixed-use core areas. And we flipped that for the infill. And we said, okay, now let's make a scenario where 65% of those 43,000 units locate in the mixed-use core areas and in the existing neighborhoods, and only 35% happens in the these development areas in rural. And what's driving that is this thing on the right. So the priority here is the blue area in that scenario. So in fact, that stuff that's yellow and red and orange out at the edges, that's the least likely stuff to get turned on in that scenario.
And Jeremy,
Does that help?
The second point that's maybe it's getting a little bit ahead, but I think Mike will talk about it later, is that when we get to the policy part, there may be a question of, I'll call it focused public investment areas, or it's also been called tiering. In other words, when we look at these maps, where is the infrastructure? Where is it growth being allocated? Is it being allocated in clumps in certain areas? If so, can we service that best or not? So it's just to try to set that kind of discussion up.
It's really to put some information and metrics behind what I think we're all trying to say here is that, how do we know where the best place to go is? Well, that's why we want to put as much as we can together in one framework. That's why I went to this hexagon, so we can start to see where things line up and where they do not.
Jeremy?
Yes.
I think it would help if you go through the next,
Keep on moving.
because some of us have seen these,
seen this stuff?
and
Yeah,
they
okay.
do make more sense once you go
Yeah.
from that one, then on to the next one.
This one's pretty important because this is really that 65-35. This is for the infill scenario. And I think you can see that we're saying 65% of the new growth needs to go into centers and tots, or mixed-use core areas, and the established neighborhoods. It's kind of an older slide. And then also we have density targets. So it's also about the type of housing, not just where, but what kind of housing, right? So in the classic scenario, we build a lot of that traditional single-family product. In these scenarios, we're building more high-density products. And we're going to see some metrics that show exactly how they differ. I'll just rip through these. You guys have seen these before too, I think, as well. But here's the vacant land footprint. I will promise that next time I show you this, I'll take the constraints out. You can see the federal land and all that stuff is not actually in there. Underutilized land. This is land that is zoned for one thing, maybe 4 units an acre, but only has 1 unit on it right now. You could subdivide that and you could squeeze some more life out of it. These are redevelopment areas that, in talking with the jurisdictional staff, or that are in the master plans, we've identified are areas where we allowed redevelopment to happen. So we actually took stuff away and put new things in. this is a nightmare of a spreadsheet that I created, which, right? But it's actually really cool because what you can see over here is two red numbers way over there, 1500 and 1659. What that's telling us is that we don't have the capacity to meet our predetermined targets with regard to these higher density classes given the vacant lands today. And so we had to actually do a process of upzoning for our mixed use, or for our smart greenfield and our infill scenario. We said, okay, we're going to choose some areas where we're going to take land that is currently zoned in a lower density class, and we're going to make it higher density. And the mixed use one, I kind of heard, sorry, the infill scenario, I just took it upon myself to go about it. But with the smart greenfield, we worked with the jurisdictions and we identified these green zones as areas where we wanted to see what would happen. We're not saying that we want this to happen. We're just saying we want to see what happens if we do this. What is the impact of this? We don't know. Let's try it out.
Jeremy, can you reconcile that concept, the upzoning, with the map 2-3 slides ago that has the underutilized land based on the zoning?
Yeah, the difference, okay, I don't have to go back there. The difference is that these lands don't have the zoning today, and we gave them enhanced zoning.
Understood.
So-
But, yes.
Can you give us a?
Yeah, give us a hint what these are.
Okay,
I think
so
it's pretty clear with the.
Woodland Village in the county,
What's
Woodland
that?
Village, they've asked for condos, I think they're townhouses.
Who is it?
Woodland Village,
Oh, Woodland.
Woodland, Sierra Reflections down in the south.
Okay.
That's Damani, the kind of large one. I think it's Butler Ranch, I think so. And then Kylie, a little tiny bit of Kylie, and the quarry.
You just randomly picked these?
I did not, no, I worked with Sienna, Jim, and Chad from the counties. Yeah, no. The first attempt I did it, but then they were like, no.
They didn't let you.
Yeah, that's right.
They said, go play.
They said,
Jeremy.
come on back, you don't want that.
Start coloring in hexagons.
Right. So it's an experiment to see what is the impact. I think you'll see it's an interesting impact, so.
And I
let's
think
go.
it's important to point out that that's not, you didn't do that and say, okay, guys, this is what I want you to accept.
Correct, I did
That's
not.
not a motion that's set out there saying,
No.
this is what we're recommending.
We have
That's
zero, we
just
have
an
no authority
example.
over that kind of zoning stuff. It's just, this is a thinking machine, right? We want to put these things out there so we can understand what we'll do.
Yeah, not in a vacuum.
Not in a vacuum, exactly. So here we go. Number one, classic. You've sort of seen this before, but again, this is what does it look like if the past 20 years, right? We tried to build just like that again. And I like to do the back and forth. So watch the inside of the McCarran ring. That is that red circle sort of right in the center. Now we go to the McCarran scenario. It darkens. More of the hexagons turn on. Right? You can see that Evans Ranch does not build out as much. There's less building going on in that Mortensen-Garson area. Also to the southeast. Let's kind of go back and forth. It's not as big of a difference as we may have hoped when we did the housing study. And so we said, hey, why don't we get a
Wait,
little bit...
what was it? So this was classic, what was the
This
other
is
one?
classic, this is McCarran.
McCarran,
Yeah,
sorry.
this is McCarran, no worries.
Well, a noticeable distinction to me is that we don't go all the way up the hillside to the county line
Correct. Yep,
above
The
the
east.
ranch,
that's right.
which we've started to plug along there, and so that tames that back from some entitlements, because it doesn't have, it's just 1 to 40 right now.
That's right, this is just a way, if we were to leave that alone, that's what we decided, you guys decided, really, I'm not deciding. If you were to leave that alone, the impacts will be different, and we'll see what those are. Okay, so now into the new scenario land, smart greenfield. Does anything jump out at you right away?
More diverse.
Okay, so it is going out, because it is a greenfield scenario. We wanted to make sure that 65% of the new development was happening in those developing areas and rural areas. But to me, what happens is it's way sparser than the other two.
Jeremy, it would be interesting to add in sort of the four corners light rail to see how that would change.
To see what it would do? Yeah.
To see how it would change.
No.
it.
We're not going down that road.
Yeah.
Just imagine.
Come over to the office for that.
Not right now.
I will be.
Well, what was interesting to me with this one is look at how much, there's fewer hexagons that are going to turn on. So let's go ahead and look at the last one.
If
Oh, go ahead, yes, Sarah.
in the smart greenfield,
Yeah.
As you're standing out there, is the underlying assumption that the infrastructure is there?
The driving, yes, the driving lens, I'll go back to it, that drives Smart Greenfield is this
Is
one.
the proximity, okay.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, so that's really what says, why would I choose to build this hexagon before that one? This one's closer to all the infrastructure than that. Yeah, exactly that. And finally, infill. And there are quite a few hexagons that get turned on in this, but you can see they're even less up the hill, and they're less out to the north, less in Verdi. And so Terry and I were thinking about this before we came over, and just thinking about how many hexagons, 40-acre hexagons, actually got turned on to create the allocation. In the classic scenario, it was 2,047 out of 5,540.
I have to raise my hand on this, sorry.
Yeah, oh, sure, yeah.
So I'm just gonna, you got the airport, so right to the right and up by the river, that's UNR Farm.
Uh-huh.
So are you saying, is this your theory that UNR Farm, for example, in this scenario, infill would change from a farm to a
Correct.
development?
It's
I just want to make sure I
That's
understand.
right, yeah, it's zoned very low density. And so
Well, today it's zoned agricultural, but
I believe it has some sort of, or maybe we've made an
well,
assumption
only
about.
100 acres of like 9,000. The one right up on McCarran is zoned,
Mhm.
but the rest of it is agriculture.
It's possible that during our housing study, we turned it into 1 per 40. I'll have to look, but we didn't change anything, so there must be some allowance for.
Just wondering,
For housing.
popped
yeah.
out at me. I
Yeah,
don't-
no, it absolutely is the UNR Farms, but it's like probably like 20 homes. It's not like 4,000 homes.
So when you're talking about infill, are you talking about all of this being vacant land that could potentially change? Are you talking about raising the structures that are on it and
Good
adding
question.
higher density, or just gentrification?
I'm talking about all of it. In the infill scenario, 80% of the new growth was on vacant land. 10% was in underutilized areas, and 10% was redeveloped. And that was the highest turnover. In the other scenarios, it was closer to 90 or even 95% on vacant land.
Why'd you call it Smart Greenfield? Why'd you label it that? Because it looks to
Oh,
me
I
like
don't
it
know.
has more intensive use of infrastructure, capital outlay, than say infill. So, from the earlier discussion, is that smart?
In fact, it was the proximity to existing infrastructure and trying to optimize or capitalize on existing infrastructure
Yeah, I've heard that.
that led to
Yeah.
this. That is what drives this.
The smart?
The smart part is also densifying or
Yeah,
upzoning
that's what it is.
when the capacity is available. And one of our limitations, if I may, is that we do not have good capacity data. I cannot necessarily get in a regional fashion the capacity in the sewer system. So I can't put 4,000 units and say, when do I break this interceptor? That's like hired out to Stantec.
That's
In
hired
some
out to
cases- Stantec, in some cases, right, for the city of Reno. If it's the city of Sparks, you guys have an amazing sewer model that can do that. And so there are differences, I'm not pointing fingers, that's just one example. And it's differential across all the different infrastructure provision pieces.
But could you go back, what do you mean hired out to Stanford? What's that mean?
What I mean is that,
Consultants tell us.
correct.
We don't maintain the data in-house, is that what we're trying to say?
Well, I mean, I think you're trying to, if that's happening, right?
Yes, we are definitely getting.
Of course.
I'm sorry, Sam.
No, it's a lot more data oriented in terms of getting to a place where we can manage all of these developments, even down to a much finer grain than what Jeremy has in his database. All the way
Right,
down
but I
to
mean, the
building
data
permits
doesn't
and
belong to
FIMA.
Stantec, I mean, it belongs to.
Yeah, and so once we have a better handle on our own development data, then we can start taking that next step and say, well, what does that mean? from a
Development
sewer
data or
model
infrastructure? 'Cause he's
perspective?
talking about infrastructure, sewer, what?
Right, but we need to be able to front load a model to even be able to have a model that runs. We have to have the inputs.
Are you
for it.
really saying though, where does it even exist? And how big is it, and what's the capacity in space? You said we don't have a GIS database.
We have a
of our-
GIS database of where it exists. For about, I would say 75 to 80% of it has a diameter. So you can infer, right?
Okay.
You could do some modeling and say, this is linked up to so many units that we know about, and you could maybe model that. There is no comprehensive version of that.
For the region?
Correct.
Yeah, or
Yes.
we might be on different platforms.
Correct.
Or is that where
Yes.
you're going?
Different platforms. Where I'm going is that
You know, I got it.
this is a model in an attempt to get us to the real thing that's a model,
Got it.
right? This is our thinking machine. Where we're
No, I
trying
got that part,
yeah,
but what I
yeah.
wanted to find out was what you didn't have and what we could do to facilitate that.
Well, that's a list that we should work on, what exactly I don't have, because there's a lot. But there's a lot we do have, and that's how we've been able to get to here.
Yeah. But my main and further conversation later, we
Okay.
can talk about that, so you can do a better job.
Together we can do a better job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you gather density around cannabis facilities?
No. Not purposefully.
Not purposely, but it just worked out that way?
I hope not. So, just the number of hexagons that have to be used, I think what you can, if you think about infilling, right, into existing neighborhoods and our core areas, what's already there? A lot of development. And so, a 40-acre hexagon doesn't necessarily have 40 acres of vacant land, like it does in a developing area.
It may be 1 or 2, 3 houses or something.
That's exactly right. It might
that are
fit a
available.
3-unit thing in there. So that's why the way that it pans out is about 2,047 hexagons get turned on in the classic scenario. That's by far the most, because we're building off low-density product. McCarran, 1,639, 1,639 hexagons. Smart Greenfield is under 1,000, like 960. And then the infill is about 1,350. So that's, and we also have an acreage measure, which we'll look at. But the point here is not that I want any of these things to happen, or that anyone here wants any of these developments, patterns to occur. We want to know, what are the impacts of one development pattern versus another?
So Jeremy, before you go too, I mean, you made some assumptions. Could you
Yes.
go back to your?
Oh, yeah, of course. Lots of
That's
assumptions.
what we are trying to understand, though. In order for us to like go look at these maps on the wall
Yeah.
and say, oh, I might prefer this one, I might prefer that one, it's important for us to understand what assumptions. That's why I asked about Unar Farm.
Yeah.
What was your assumption? You kept the zoning, you changed the zoning. What was your assumption about floodplains? What was your assumption about
Floodplains
going
are never
uphill? What?
Floodplains are never built.
Oh, well, what was your? I'm just trying to understand
AE floodplain.
what they are.
Yes. Well, there's a development constraint, a pretty strict development constraints right in the regional plan that says if the slope is greater than 30%, you don't build on it. So those are out. If it's a AE floodway, it's out. If it's federal lands, can't build on it. If it is a wetland, can't do it. Water body, playa, stream, any of that.
But in one of these, you did up zoning.
I sure did, yes. But I told you about it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's,
But did you do up zoning in any of these others?
I did upzoning in the two, and actually in two of them, the infill scenario. It's not really upzoning in the infill scenario because it was a mixed-use area and there is no
You
cap.
assumed a higher density
Correct.
then,
Yeah.
that towards the higher end of the mixed-use density
That's correct.
category.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
And in the Greenfield, the Smart Greenfield
Yeah.
one, actually went in and said, no, we're going to make this really dense. We're going to put townhomes in somewhere that right now would be single-family homes.
Right now, today, we
I mean,
would
that's
tear.
zoned for that.
Oh,
Yeah.
Hey, Jeremy, I don't see your model being, and I'm not being, accusatory, it's just
No,
more
it's
conversational.
Sure. It's
Is,
wrong.
I don't see it being sensitive, maybe is the word, to the concept that I think needs to be discussed is what is the difference between unincorporated land and incorporated land? I think that has always been the fundamental question because that, not having a clear distinction was that fuels the competition and conflict with the cities, and the county. So, I mean, I think a fundamental question needs to be posed to this, in this planning area is there going to be a difference of complexion and land use as we go forward between what an unincorporated area is and what incorporation is?
Well, there currently certainly is a distinction that we use in the TMSA, and we specifically took that away. And the reason for that is that we wanted to see from the infrastructure provision standpoint and from the other characteristics that affect development standpoint, the impacts. That's where we're getting to, the evaluation criteria of what does one pattern versus another mean? Because how do we know where to draw that line, really, if we don't know what the impacts of putting growth there or not would be? There could be some areas that are currently unincorporated in, say, Washoe County, like Sun Valley, that have capacity for, they have the infrastructure capacity and they really could densify or redevelop. And because they have a nomenclature right now that's unincorporated, they will not, according to the current
You
plan.
could argue unincorporated with the GID coverage is a different character.
Surely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think we should move on here.
Let's go to the impacts, because I think the impacts are the key here. That's the new stuff. This just says that I also do employment, but I don't want to show you because it's a whole other crazy thing. It's on the maps if you want to look, I'm happy to talk about it, but let's talk evaluation, because I think this is where we're trying to get to and why we're doing this. We're not doing it because, you know, there are assumptions, and it's flawed for sure. But we want to look at the differential impacts of one pattern versus another. And so we have 18 evaluation criteria that we're working on, Terry and I have come up with, and the others. These are linked to the regional plan goals. And so we have this matrix that also is here today, and it's going to be one of our activities, is for you to look at this matrix of the goals that we adopted: quality of regional living, natural environment, right? The economy, the cost and efficiency, the equity and diversity piece. These are the metrics. These are things we can actually measure. Anything in the gray, I do not have completed yet. I apologize.
When you talk about cost and efficiency,
Yes.
are you talking about a municipality's ability to sustain
Correct.
an area with all the critical services?
And that we can be efficient about that and keep costs down. Yeah, that we should have a region. A goal of our regional plan should be that.
Yeah, but I mean, we all know that from 5 to 7 years of the time we build a residential dwelling unit, it costs us more than the taxes it yields.
We know that for the way that we have been building residential units to date. This is a way for us to explore building differently. And maybe there are different impacts.
Two different things, Bob. Property tax and building.
Say that again, now?
Property tax and building and the way it's built is two different things in my mind. The property tax needs to change for sure.
So, Jeremy,
Okay, yeah.
really quickly, so cost and efficiency, I would question whether or not that relates to, are you talking the municipality's ability, cost to provide the same services there that they provide in another area? Is that a factor that's brought into that?
Well, let's, for example, see the second measure called infill development. That's right out of NRS, which says that we should be,
You have to.
yeah, that we should be targeting older neighborhoods for development and, you know, stopping premature expansion, right? And so we think that a metric that measures how well we've been doing that or not speaks to cost and efficiency, because there's already services there.
I agree.
So
Good.
okay.
And under cost and efficiency, could we also put a line item where we say that HOAs take over some of the duties and responsibilities that historically governments have? Upkeep on roads.
That one I've never
parks.
thought, that might be, look, we're pretty regional, thinking pretty high, but maybe that's a thing, we never thought about that one, but I think we could explore it.
And maybe an HOA, we have this in Spanish Springs, where the HOAs in certain areas are responsible for their own storm conveyance channels.
Yeah.
And the county does not.
Yeah, I mean, we have it in South Reno as
You
well.
got it.
The only challenge here, this is just a wild card, is that, as I've talked to some of these HOAs, I mean, some of them are just very unhappy with that level of governance,
I see, take one.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, they feel like it's too tight, too controlling, too restrictive, too overbearing.
I don't know that
And some
we're
of them
even
want to actually do
talking
away.
about even trying to go to that level
Yeah.
with this regional plan, right?
Just sharing.
Yeah, no, agreed, but I think we're trying to get a handle on where does it make sense from a cost and efficiency perspective to go next with our infrastructure, right? Because we do have a lot of capacity. We've got, you know, even though maybe it's not on the market flying around so people can buy it every day, there's a lot of vacant land out there that is entitled for the units. Well, these are the measures, and I think, you know, we would love to get your feedback as we do the exercise. When we go over there and we would ask you, I'll be standing here to help guide you, but just to put some dots on the criteria that you think are the most influential or the most important. And you're going to get 5 dots. And if you have questions about them or how they relate to the goals at that time, we can discuss that. 5.
Total or per city?
But we'll give instructions.
Yeah, we'll give the exact instructions. Yeah, very true. Terry, yes.
Just 2 quick points. The main
You're going to see
point
metrics, I
is-
promise you.
is just to illustrate that the things we can measure, which are in the left-hand column, cover the goals that you have given us. And some are covered better than others, but everything is addressed one way or another. That's the main point of this. The second point, as Jeremy says, is if you think about what's important to you and we get your opinion about that over there, when we start defining a preferred alternative and doing the evaluation, it will give us some sense of the trade-offs that you think are important and allow us to do different weightings when we're illustrating the results of the mapping exercise.
That's right, thank you, Terry. Because we are not asking you today or ever to pick one of these 4 scenarios as the future you want. We are asking you to think about how these scenarios measure up and how do you like it to measure? What is the perfect scenario where all the measurements are what you want, right? And that's going to be tough, consensus to build, but or what you can get, or what you can, and then there's trade-offs. Exactly.
Yeah, maybe it's a combination of 2 or 3 of them.
It's a combination, absolutely. Yep.
But the best way to predict the future is to invent it.
Invent it?
Well, there's also a huge part of this about what our desired future is.
That's right.
Right, and that's part of it.
That's not a new concept, by the way. That's not a new
Okay.
concept.
Well, let's look at some metrics, because now we're in metric land. We finally have some evaluation criteria. Now, I've got this in the primary colors, because we've got blue is 1, classic. 2 is red, that's McCarran. Smart, greenfield, it's green, right, number 3. And then the infill is a yellow color. All right. So, what is this one showing us? The total acres of residential land consumed. To achieve that pattern, we need 17,000 acres or more. To achieve these patterns over here, we're down in the 7,000 acre range. Very different land consumption amounts, right? To achieve the same number of units, 43,207 units. This further, we did this by those neighborhood types I showed you. So now we're seeing where those realizations are happening. And what you can see is that in the classic scenario, a ton of that acreage is being gobbled up in rural areas and in developing areas, as we've identified them. So another way to kind of contextualize this versus, look at employment areas. Some of that is bleed over from the housing study, but there's not a lot happening inside employment areas. That makes sense. Okay, this was the second metric, the infill development. How are we doing in terms of what NRS said to do? And we took a shot at a criteria on the right there where we said, okay, we're going to look at the assessor data, and we're going to use that year built field that's in there that tells you the year that the parcel was developed. And we're going to pick everything 1999 and older. And then we're going to see how that interacts with our 40-acre hexagons. And if greater than 50% of the land area inside the hexagon had been built prior to 2000, we said that's an established neighborhood. And now we're just going to look at the 4 realizations here and find out how many units we got inside those old areas. And I think you can see, if we build in the infill way, right, that is going to be really targeting those areas that are already established. Versus if we build in some of the more greenfield-oriented way, we're opening up new land. That's the question. How about housing types? We've talked about these many times in the housing study. We've got density class 1, that's half-acre lots and larger. Density class 2, lots that can hold 2 units or 2 units per acre to 7 units per acre. Then we have a middle category, 7 units to 15 units per acre. Density class 4, the moderate density multifamily is from 15 units to 30 units per acre. And then finally, high density multifamily is 30 units per acre and larger. These 4 scenarios all realize the future differently in terms of the housing type mix. Does anything jump out to anybody? The moderate, right? So we have a lot of it, no matter what we do, right? The moderate. We're building a lot of that, but which one builds the most? Classic, right? In fact, if we're looking at the classic, we have the highest number of that low-density single-family type, and we have the highest percentage of the moderate density type, and then it trails off pretty sharply. Whereas the other scenarios do a better job of meeting that higher density demand that work with the affordable housing folks, work that was done with the city of Reno, and our housing study seemed to show that is where our community, the need is headed. Not necessarily towards these products we've been building traditionally, that we have a lot of already, but towards products that are potentially more affordable over here.
Jeremy, did you look at, over time, the aging population and how the market would change and the demand would change for housing style?
That was part of the demographic work during the housing study, absolutely. I believe that also the city of Reno looked at that when they did their housing study. I didn't explicitly model that as part of this. We just said, based on that understanding, we think that this product needs to come up. And really, again, it's just to sort of test, if we build more of this product, what happens?
Right.
Yeah. So that's obviously very different. This one, okay, just bear with me. Talk about assumptions. Here we go down assumption land. But, I called Zillow, called WalkScore. I try to get these available online data sources. They're very expensive. We don't have the money to buy this stuff. So we come up with our own methods, right? So we did Foreman's Zillow. Here we took about 3 years of sale prices for homes inside the assessor data. Every housing sale, right, has a price. And then we normalized that data since 2016 to the sort of summer 2018 housing price. And then we said, okay, now we've got about 10,000 spots where we know what the house sold for. And then we did something called interpolation, where it's called inverse distance weighting interpolation, and you create a surface that covers the entire TMSA. And we basically created a multiplier factor everywhere for the assessor's appraised value difference to the sale price.
Everybody got that?
I did.
Yeah, right? It's pretty cool. So we were able to value, that's how we helped Mike, where's Mike? Get to the value of the Commonwealth, because we were able to calculate now the value of all the roughly 175,000 units that are inside the TMSA today, right? And so then we went a step further and said, okay, we're going to build the units. Where are we going to build them? Because the geography matters. Are housing prices the same everywhere across town? No, they're not. So how you build one pattern versus another has impacts on the cost of a home. And I think what you can see is that the most expensive product in the 800,000 range is the low-density single-family product. I mean, if you live on an acre with a big old house, maybe it's worth $1 million. And then it goes down from there. There's slight variation in those values as well, but generally you can see that the trend is pretty similar. And what that led us then to the next step was to add it all up. And so depending on what we build and where it gets built, these are the price tags. If you were to price all the houses as they would sell today that you would build in the future, the classic scenario would be about 18 billion, all the way down to 14 billion in these two more dense class scenarios. Because we're building less of those big products that cost more. Now, I would not take these numbers to the bank or anything and expect them to give you anything, right? But if there's error, which there is, it should all be in the same direction.
So Jeremy, how do you take the cost of the sale of a home and then determine that's the cost of building?
I do not, that is not, that is certainly not what I'm saying. We could try that.
Those are the words you just used.
Well, if we build them, they will be worth that if they were to sell today.
Okay.
It's a relative measure.
And the reason I asked that question is because all three entities have been hearing the same thing, whether it's individual or at the regional level, that, well, entry-level price homes now are no longer $125,000, they're $240,000. And that's just what the market will bear. Mm-hmm. And that has something to do with what we're all looking at for affordable housing.
Agreed.
So none of this explains affordable housing.
It doesn't necessarily explain affordable housing, but it does seem very suggestive that if you build more of the higher density product, that it will be less money to buy them. That should be more affordable. But I will tell you this, there's a tool that we are trying to get our hands on that is a tool that Terry's coworkers called Mapcraft. I think we've talked to you about it. Yes. And it goes deeper. It runs pro formas for building costs, for many different housing types. And we did that in the housing study. And if we were going to go down that route for affordable housing, and that's the route we're trying to go down.
And Jeremy,
we want to go there.
I think it's important to point out, Kevin, that that's not really the focus of this particular job that we're at right now. Okay. So, no question affordable housing is a big issue and we're going to have to deal with that. But really what Jeremy's, all of these graphs and everything are heading us towards is what's our plan going to look like, and where are we going to as a group say, okay, this is where we think the building should go in this area or that area or whatever. And I really think that's why we're not looking at, okay, this is affordable housing. But it is true that if we build in more affordable communities like the infill scenario, we are going to be able to build more affordable housing because the bus routes are in that area, so the people are not having to, you know, they may not have a car, so they're not on a outlying area where there's no bus routes. There's a lot of factors involved with
I
that.
don't disagree with that, but what I see us making decisions on is higher density with the quote-unquote, from the applicant's representative, this is now going to be, make it more affordable housing, but we are leaving an element completely out of being able to live there, and that's those who deserve affordable housing. So when we look at increasing density, we're increasing traffic, we're increasing many flows, but we're not seeing numbers come down to where the bottom 20% can afford to live there. So we're being misled almost, as Naomi said, happened last night to the city of Reno in a conversation of buildable areas. That's why I asked the question, because I'm making decisions on higher density based upon affordable. And yes, it may impact some traffic issues, it may impact some sewer issues, it may impact some stormwater issues, but it's all being sold as the gateway to affordable housing, and I don't see it.
It's not a panacea, right?
So that's why I asked.
Yeah, no, I think we're
Sorry
all
for
we're on
side
trade-offs.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think it's a very valid point because there's no question that it's an issue we have to deal with. And if my emails this morning after the city council's meeting yesterday are any indication, it's a big issue in this whole community, and an issue of concern about building in open spaces within the footprint of the greater Truckee Meadows. I think there's a lot of, I can't tell you the number of emails I received from people today who said they were so glad that Reno did what they did because they don't want their open spaces taken away. So I think those are all factors we have to look at when we look at this. So of course your point is very valid, but I think right now we're just trying to move through this process so that we can get something on paper so we can all say, yes, this works, or no way is that going to make it. We're going to have to do something different.
And I think it's a first step, and I think after we do the work that Terry and Mike have been talking about, we're talking about convening, right, the experts, the staff, we will find out that Jeremy's model is wrong and in areas, right, and we'll have to adjust. But it'll get us to the point where we have a plan. Well, that's right. Well,
so the good and the bad.
The good and the bad.
Jeremy, let me ask you a question.
Sure thing.
The water hookup costs, it's, I think the next slide.
Yeah, sure.
Those seem as dialed down as could be. And I'm wondering if that's because Tumwa has done such a good job in distinguishing their area fees.
They have done a great job.
So
yes,
the takeaway to me on this, because Reno is at a decision juncture on area fees for sewer. We've been all blended.
Sure. One size fits all in the area.
And it really, this jumps out to me and tells me that when you do your area charges, it can be a real big mover on your costs there.
Exactly.
I'd love to see RIFs thrown in here.
Okay.
I mean, because, Reno's had a kind of on the go-to list of really examining the RIFs. And,
What's a RIF?
it's the regional road impact fee charge. What are those right now? 8,000 a lot, a single family?
I don't know.
Mr. RTC, ma'am?
Well, I don't know what the exact roof is because they redid them recently, and I'm not exactly sure.
I'd like to make a specific request to see RIFs on here in terms of McCarran infill, sort of.
That metric.
Yeah, because that's how you drive down costs. Particularly the correlation to RIFs they're for congestion. And in infill scenario, are you really looking for they're for capacity.
Right.
Infill scenario, are you really looking for roadway capacity? You're looking for other things, right? Multimodalism.
That's right. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because we can pop back to, we have some transportation demand model outputs. Not that one. Right here. Schwinn and Dan and Amy and everyone at the RCC, not only did they help with the transportation demand model, but they actually ended up having to plot these plot splits today. So thank you for that, because our plotter had some difficulties. But so this is, I ran through the Transcad model, right? Every one of these scenarios, put them into the TAZ data, and when you put it into this sort of normalized, that's the per capita, is to normalize it. So it's not a very huge difference that you're seeing here, but what you're seeing is that the McCarran scenario actually has the lowest. In fact, the McCarran scenario seems to perform the best through the transportation demand model, and I think it's because of this. Look at where McCarran is in the core, right? If we put 25% of the units in there versus even our infill scenario, which really we could build anywhere that is orange or dark orange. So the mode share, for example, the only movement on mode share was for bike ped, really, in the McCarran scenario.
Yeah, I think something's off here on this stuff.
Well, unfortunately,
I think there's some lack of
I think it was
sensitivity.
revealing that it's a very tiny increment.
Yes.
Which is, I thought was interesting.
I think it's flawed. I mean, I think there's some fundamentals that should be showing a different way. Maybe some things did not throw in some different patterns coming in. I don't know. I don't think that's right.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, we are still a very auto-centric community.
But if you
And
saw
so-
I think that's the entire West.
No,
Well, it's America.
That's the entire.
I'm not, and when I say community, I do mean this community, but just in general. I mean,
Yeah, you know, we were taught in Southern California that as soon as you could drive there, you get your license, and you were on that freeway.
But I just think that these scenarios are so different on the land use.
Yeah.
That a land use of that would not be driving that close of increments on your modal splits. I mean, I don't see it.
You may be right. I will tell you
mean,
that I am.
The transportation people here can what was not presumed in here? I mean, different facilities maybe didn't come in at different points.
We ran the travel demand model for RTC, and there's build assumptions in there for the 2040 network. We ran the 2038 projection against the 2040 network, and the mode split is a function of the inputs. And so my initial take is what I was saying, that look at how small the McCarran ring is compared to the umber color and the orange color.
But I mean, go back to the modal split. Okay, so, I mean, they're indistinguishable on all four. So even the McCarran and the infill aren't even that far off of the classic and the other patterns.
True, but like a 2% increase in walking and biking would be great.
I mean, maybe you should throw it up to VMT and then you'll see.
Well, so it did the VMT per capita. It's also very, very slight difference. I think we need to calibrate what that means. It's the per capita thing that I think is.
Yeah, that's the key.
I think I'll get us a total for the next round too, the total VMT, get the totals for you guys. I was surprised at first as well, so there could be something in there, but.
Doesn't RTC and everybody else use 10, well, not VMT, they use 10 TPDs as the baseline for a dwelling unit. ADTs.
Average thing.
Right.
I don't know what that is. All I know is that it's a process, but I'm able to take the land use realization and turn it into the traffic analysis zone data that feeds into the traffic analysis model.
But I think,
It needs to come out. I mean,
but instead of using ADTs,
my level
turn
right there.
it back to VMTs, that would be interesting. How far are people actually traveling?
There's no end, right? That's sort of like, but yes, let's try.
Well, that makes one place more desirable to develop versus another place.
So you want to try to get a geographic representation of
Yeah,
the
right. I mean, I can build cheaply in Winnemucca, but I have to drive every day. I mean, the total number of VMTs I would drive every day, and I can.
Astronomical.
Yeah, right, but I can build inexpensively.
We'll need the end model for that one.
Yeah.
Well, let's keep going. We've got the water cookies. I think this next one you'll all be very interested in, which is the wastewater generation, right? I don't know if you guys have seen this map before, but these are the warp sheds. If you're in that dark green area, if your house is there now, or you build a house in there in the future, it's going to sewer to Tumwa. If you're in the light green area at the bottom, that's going to sewer to the South Truckee Meadows Water Commission facility. And then we have the three smaller facilities up in the north. And I think that, you know, building it maybe in Lemon Valley, it may actually be now at this point being converted to Reno State.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So we still have within all of these areas,
No.
a significant amount of, what do you call it? On-site septic tanks.
Yes.
So my question here is, if we were to sewer all of those, which there's a lot, in the center of the screen, for example, that would take up capacity. Right now, it's just septic tanks. It's not near a river.
Correct.
And it is being absorbed by sand. So I guess I'm just wondering, is there want to know your assumption here. Do we transfer all the septic tanks to sewer?
Not in this model, we have
Okay.
no way. But we could count, we could try to count that because the assessor tracks where the septics are pretty well.
Or are they serving a valuable function in a way by staying off the system?
That's right, possibly. So I think just the quick thing on this one is just look at the stair step down, right? If you build more to the edges, outside that big green area, less of the new wastewater that's going to be generated is going to go to that Tumwater facility, and vice versa. In the infill scenario, Cold Springs gets no new sewage.
And Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, when we get up to do the exercises, because I know we're a little bit past time.
Yes,
so
sorry,
we
past
do
time.
that. The metrics that we're looking at here are also up on each of the scenarios. We're going to ask you to go and describe what you like and dislike about that too. So you don't have to memorize them from here or even from here. You're also going to be able to see them around the.
Absolutely, yes. So we're going to have, we might as well just go to the exercises at this point because I think it's probably tired of me talking at you. We have two main exercises for you to do. We got 5 stations in total. There's station 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are the scenarios themselves. At those stations, what we'd like you to do is take a look at them, take a look at the metrics. In this case, they're individual metrics. And we want you to just, on sticky notes that are available, write a little note, and you've got 2 choices. You'll see something you like about it or something you dislike. Particularly in terms of the measurements themselves. Like you may go over to this one and say, I see that in the infill scenario, you're putting 5,000 kids into the inside McCarran school zone, geographic zone for Washington County School District. I hate that idea. Put that on the dislike side. Or you might say, God, this is great. We're not putting any wastewater to Cold Springs. I love it, like, right? So try to look at these 4 different scenarios and just tell us what you like and dislike about them. We're going to sift through all the comments, and this is another way we're going to try to get towards understanding what you guys perceive as the good, the bad, and the ugly to get us to that preferred alternative. So that's exercise 1. We want you to go to every single scenario and do at least a comment for each, right? A like and a dislike. The more the merrier. Then the 5th station over here, which is this small thing, I'll stand there. Thank you, Nate Kusha, policy analyst. So we've got on the left the list of evaluation criteria. We will give you dots. You will get 5 dots. The colors are irrelevant. You get 5 things to prioritize out of the list of 18. All I want you to do is there's rectangles to the left of each one of them. Put a dot inside the rectangle of the 5 metrics, 1 per metric, right? Your top 5. And that will tell us right there about what maybe, generally we're all as a group thinking are the most important things we should be measuring that we can measure, right now today.
So we're going to give you some time to
Yes.
do that and also get something to eat. We're saying probably somewhere between around 20 minutes, 25 minutes to do all of that. If it feels like we need more time, we can extend it, but we know we also want to come back and talk about it. So
thank you so much for listening and for your great questions.
Good job there.
Thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Yes.
If I may, we'll just
Yes, you
notice
may.
that Councilman Dobsey will be chairing for the governing board for the rest of this meeting. We are looking to have you out for the next 25 minutes, so a bit earlier than we identified. We were able to cover a lot of ground earlier in the conversation. We got some great feedback here. So what I want to do is turn it over to Terry, And we have to do a little bit with you, and then we're going to do some communication and engagement, let you know about some events that are coming up and some other ways we're engaging with the community, and then we'll wrap it all up. So Terry, take it away.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have an interim wrap-up right now of these exercises. So first of all, thank you for participating. And the original conceit was that I was going to be able to go around, look at everything, understand it all, come up here and summarize it for you in 2 minutes. I gave that up, so I'm not going to do that. What I'm saying instead is we have all this stuff, and we are now going to take this and work on it as we start developing the preferred alternatives and the policies that go with that. We've got another meeting coming up. I'll let Kim talk about that later. But I'd like to do 2 things as part of this wrap-up, in addition to thanking you for your help. The first one is a little risky, but I'm going to do it anyway, which is, here's the question. You can see what we've done so far. We told you where we're going to try to get to, which is to start thinking about preferred alternatives. I'd like to see thumbs up, thumbs sideways, or thumbs down on whether you think we're moving in the right direction or not, and that we're going to get there. And then I want you to look and see what people are saying. And then the second thing is just go around the table and give everybody a chance to talk on, especially if your thumbs down, and what do we need to fix, because we're not going to stop. So let's do that. So first of all, the first general question is, we're heading toward trying to develop preferred alternatives and policies. Are we moving generally in the right direction? Maybe in the right direction with some pretty important reservations, or we're going the wrong way. So up, sideways, or down. So we got up, sideways, got some sideways. Got a lot of ups and a couple of sideways. Okay, so that's good. All right, so we're moving generally okay. We don't have it done yet, but we're getting there. All right, then secondly, I'd like to give everybody at the table an opportunity to make a comment, try to keep it to a few sentences if we're going to stay on Kim's schedule, which is, if there's one thing you want to tell us as we start to develop the preferred alternatives and the policies, and if you want to stretch it to 2, maybe, tell us those 1 or 2 things. And so, if it's okay, can I start with you?
Sure. I'm in total agreement with the infrastructure funding model of bringing major funding to Washington or to the state as a regional agency. I worked a long time at a big national laboratory in California that had many entities, and the only way that we could build infrastructure was to get the entities to put a facilities group together, decide on what was important and where it was going to go, and then went forward to Washington to get the funding. And it can work, that model can work exactly the same here.
Good, thank you. We'll just keep moving pretty quickly.
Okay. I think we're not undermining how great of a task this is. I think it's a huge task. But when I look back at the project schedule, started in February of 2018, and if I look at this, it says the March 2019 is when it's going to be drafted and done. We're in December, essentially, and I would have liked to seen a draft by now. We're talking all these scenarios, and I'm seeing these great, Jeremy's doing a great job showing me a lot of colors and a lot of things, but I want to see pen hit the paper. And I would like to say, I think we needed a draft tonight, something to move forward so it can go to the entities and have a little bit better direction with responses from us in a draft scenario, because it's crunch time. You look at the end of it, it's March 2019, and we don't even have a draft to look at. So I'm worried about getting it thrown on my desk on February 15th. It says, hey, we're going to have this show.
Okay, good. Concern noted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, been doing OPM my whole life. That's how we live in Nevada, because we're a low government state and low money state. So we've been living off other people's money for a long time. only way to get there was rightly pointed out as an entity in collaboration. So totally agree with that. As far as the exercise, this is just personal to me. I wasn't in a frame or time ability, given our big agenda yesterday for 12 hours at our council, to give this as much thought as I would like to. So I'm planning to sit down with Jeremy and go over each of these so I can give a little bit more thoughtful response on the like, dislike. But it was kind of obvious when we were going through the scenarios to me that yellow and green were where it was at, right? Well, for me. So that was informative to me because they seemed to hit on many of the criteria. It was very hard for me to interpret this criteria thing. I didn't understand the bolding and the light and the dark and what you were really looking for from us on that. So I don't think that actually worked that well.
Okay.
But overall, I think we're going in the right direction. I have been a little struggling over the time frame. I mean, I'm comfortable because I know planning takes a long time. I've had to manage planning processes for a long time, and I know these schedules that people put out are generally unrealistic. So it wasn't as concerning. I mean, I'd love to have the plan done already, right, yesterday. But realistically, I pretty much figured it would take at least 6 months longer than what we had here. That was just my normal ad.
Okay.
We're a bunch of people. We all have different ideas, and it takes a while to reach consensus.
Okay, thank you.
I have no conversation to add at this point.
Okay, thanks. Kim, do you want to comment?
No, thank you.
Okay.
I would say the one thing that I would like to see, and I showed Kim this note, is with the scenarios, the service costs of the scenarios and what it takes to operate and maintain those various scenarios. I mean, we have the upfront costs in there, but I mean, what are the long-term costs to the region of infill versus greenfield versus the classic? I don't know how to get there. I mean, that's why Jeremy's the whiz that he is, but I think that's one piece of the puzzle that would be nice to know.
It's always good to sit after Peter because he usually voices what I'm thinking as well. But for me also would be, and I wrote it somewhere here, is that after looking at the scenarios, I had questions that didn't fit in the like or dislike categories. So a bin to say, what about this? And then is the comparison between the projected needed of housing, but yet we still have that looming approved but not yet built, which is almost double of what we need. So factoring that in there, and but I think it's very telling that on the evaluation criteria, what we've been talking about, maybe it's Mike, but is wastewater treatment and sewage. So.
It's good going after these guys too. My concern is of course the wastewater, sewage, and also the infrastructure. And I'm lucky enough that this is the second time I get to go through the regional plan update. This is more comprehensive, and I do see that, and I do appreciate everything that staff has done to put into this and everything else. And I guess it's a lot to absorb and to try to decide, okay, yes, that's a like or a dislike. So I do appreciate, though, Mike's story, which I would hope you would share what happened with Lane County with, Eugene and Springfield, because it does sound like, Reno and Sparks, what I hope we never get there as far as planning, where we get to a point where the state says, okay, we're not going to issue permits anymore because you guys can't seem to figure out how to do it together.
Thank you.
At the risk of adding to more meeting time, because I think we also share a sense of urgency that we got to get this thing done and we got to keep plowing ahead. The one observation I would make, I felt a little bit, I want to say, in the evaluation of the criteria, I almost think we need to spend a little more time unpacking the various weightings and considerations we need to give to each of the criteria. As of, for instance, air quality, kind of a big one, and kind of a big one in terms of we want to avoid any future hammers dropping on us. Certainly, wastewater is top of mind for everyone, and so that was good to have. But, as another, for instance, yes, we're all collectively concerned about housing affordability, but, this might be not the most popular thing to say. In the grand scheme of, a 20-year planning horizon, we're going to see some ebbs and flows that are going to happen regardless. I mean, certainly, as a for instance, I think housing mix is very important in this plan. The affordability piece needs to plug into this, but, so, just those are for instances of maybe we need to spend a little more time about, talking through the various possible weightings of those criteria and how we should look at them.
Yeah, on the infrastructure funding, I like the idea of approaching the Washington officials as a team, and that's something I'd like to pursue more, looking into that. I think that's an excellent idea that should be explored further.
Okay. Thank you.
I voiced my opinion about the control part, but I think we're biting off way more than we can chew, and I don't see this happening in the March time, April timeline. I would rather see our number one thing we have to deal with is infrastructure and wastewater. Let's pick one thing and do it right and get it done right so that we can look at other people's money. If we do a half-assed job on each area, we're getting nowhere. And that's what my fear is. We're going to get something, we're going to cram it through in the last 30 days, and it's going to be such a flawed document, no one can work with it. Let's pick one thing, let's excel at it, and let's get that done to perfection. And I think the infrastructure and wastewater is it.
Just to clarify on that, is that there's a project and a requirement for a regional plan, so that's what we're working on. So
We're
what you're
3
saying
years
is
late,
not,
so-
we're going to keep it,
We're going to be to the next one before this is
we're
finished.
going to keep it in the envelope of the regional plan, but emphasize that, or are you saying we're not?
It has to be in the regional plan,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, it's the number one problem we have. And the one thing, Story County was mentioned one time in this whole day. Story County is the one who's causing all our consternation here. We haven't talked to them. We haven't talked to them to say, are you willing to participate and help us out? I've had some conversations. I've had some conversations with Story County, and they're willing to talk. They didn't walk up with a big checkbook and say, we'll write you a big number, but they're willing to talk, and that's something, since they're driving our roads and congestion on our roads, why not? Why couldn't they participate? And maybe they build us in Northwest Connecticut. Maybe they build another intersection. There's a gazillion things that could do.
First of all, I agree with my fellow commissioners and council members and county commissioners in the schedule and the time of the schedule being completed in March. Having just completed the city of Reno one in the last 12 months, I would hate to see this one rushed at the very end, as was described, just to meet a deadline. And I would hope that that doesn't happen here. Infrastructure, as Ed just mentioned, Councilman Lawson's right on the head with it. And if you pick one and we go after it and we model it and do it right the first time, then we have a model to grow from as regional for all the other future infrastructure developments we need. Last, and it's particularly regarding schools. Jeremy did a great job in providing information on what the capacities of the schools are for the areas, but we really need to have it relate to what development is. Not only with schools, but with sewer and stormwater also would be a great thing that appears can be added to his modeling very, not necessarily easily, but without him spending any extra time whatsoever.
That's right, right? I'm taking that note down. No time whatsoever.
Thank you.
Well, I'm real glad to see us change the pattern we've had. Development has been run by developers. It hasn't been run by the government. And now we're finally going to have a plan. And it's great, it's a good thing, I believe. And, because we're responsible for that. And we're supposed to be the ones that plan and guide our counties in the proper direction. And I think that we've all been a little bit neglectful. We are responsible, and that's what we got elected for or voted for. So it's good to see something happen. And thank you for all your hard work.
And my biggest concern, and always has been, is wastewater treatment, especially out in Stead, Lemon Valley area. In a closed basin, it needs to be addressed by all three entities as a group. And we need to deal with that first and foremost, is wastewater treatment. It's not that I don't believe that it can be taken care of it. We need a plan to take care of it for the whole region. We also have a nitrate problem down in Tumwater, from what I'm understanding, and that needs to be addressed too. Those are my main concerns. Thank you.
So, I think plans are really captured somewhat in the time that they roll out. This one is not going to roll out in time for the Reno City Council to have made decisions about Stonegate, to have made decisions about Daybreak. It's not going to roll out in time for this body to look at the regional impacts of this era of school building. It's not going to come out in time for the Reno City Council to make a real big decision of whether or not to take that Stead treatment plant from 4 to 8 MGD, But it'll come out in a time framework that, is and will be. And I think that, it is a comprehensive plan, but there's a lot of mechanics that I want to see and make sure that they're not lost, because the mechanics of the regional plan are almost as important as the plan itself. And I'll just say is, that distinction of city and unincorporated landscape, that falls down into annexation powers and sphere of influence. And we're operating on an expired annexation plan at the city of Reno. Projects of regional significance is a concept that I think needs some delving into and discussion. What are, our schools' projects of regional significance? And then the 20-year time frame, which I think we should stick to, tied back up to the infrastructure, is really going to be a finite time where there's winners or losers. And that's when the developers' call come in. Those of us who have been around this for a long time know, the most fundamental update to the plan was, signed off and finalized in Judge Hardesty's chambers. And that had long-reaching impacts, and it was almost 20 years, that long ago. So, maybe 2006, so 12 years ago or so. But when the plan gets out there, people are going to be coming in and look to see what it means to them and their land that they may not even be holding on to. The development world, people are always flipping stuff and, miss that one, moving that. So, but we're going to have that conversation with folks if we're going to stick to a 20-year, and on top of that, have an infrastructure constrained, fiscally constrained, product. Kim, you talked about input. I want to hear about that, because I've heard a lot. I feel the compression of the schedule also, and I'm feeling, as I know this stuff, we all know this stuff, we're rolling out to the public with Jeremy's stuff, which is great. It's pretty high level, it's pretty abstract. Yeah. We may need to get to the point where I want to understand what you're thinking about in public input, because maybe the public input just needs to see a draft. So if we can help on the time frame there rather than have workshops all over town, what are you thinking about in terms of more input?
Sure. So we have a community conversation on the regional plan update scheduled for this coming Wednesday, December 5th, at the Discovery Museum from 5:30 to 7:30. And the conversation is going to be getting the community to understand where we're at right now, including the scenarios. I'm going to be very frank and say it's not at the same depth or level that we've talked about it here, right? This is a conversation about, okay, we have some choices as a community that we have to make together. We've taken 4 different ways to look at the future. We're not saying any of these are going to happen, but it's going to help us understand what those potentials could be, And it's a follow-on to the MetroQuest, some of the surveys that we've already done describing what people's concerns are with growth and development. So we're going to have that conversation in the room, and that night we're also launching an additional survey that will allow folks to engage on the scenarios a bit more. I'll be honest and say that the exercises that you've done here tonight, I think are going to be very helpful in terms of thinking about doing some tweaking on how we ask for that input from the community. From there, I will say this, we have had our best input electronically really is through surveys, but we also anticipate, we talked about another joint meeting for this body in January to come back and approve a preferred alternative, another community conversation in late January, early February with the community. You will also have the results from the survey at that point in time. Those are the ways that we're reaching out to the community. We also did a week-long piece called Food for Thought. So for a week, we sent out to folks we knew would be really interested in planning. So the planners, developers, NABs, CABs, things like that. We said, look, come any day this week, we'll feed you lunch and we'll describe to you the work that we're doing and get your input on this. So we've done that, and we also have some specific groups that we're reaching out to them as well, including NAOP, BAN, NBA, things like that.
I can process anything with that. I love that stuff. But I'm starting to feel, having gone through the regional plan, maybe Sienna could jump in here, or the Reno Master Plan, is I was carrying around drafts and iterations of drafts for a good 9 months, where I could sit down with staff and read that and understand it. And I'm starting to feel that this next wave of input, if it's not responsive to drafting, that has put things into a certain way, maybe it's just not going to make that March deadline. And maybe we need to give you a little more, maybe you guys need to think about that. And I don't know, it's just a thought for the board to.
I want you to get this on public record. I agree with Jenny Breakfast.
We're going to write it down.
We need to have a draft. It's something that's tangible, we can look at, that everyone can understand, that we know we're going in this direction.
Yeah, and Sienna can maybe, help you, show you the iterations and then how we work through with each of those. It's not to cut out the other ones, but it may just be ready to get there. Just a thought, just a thought. Ed and I are thinking that.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, not just Ed and you, this guy here, first time, we need a draft, and I agree with you.
Okay.
So we all agree.
Let me try to sum up very briefly and just point out, I guess, some of the challenges that we're dealing with. I get the point about having a draft, and we're a little bit behind where we thought we would be, but not very much behind where we thought we would be. But where we thought we would be when we got here was with a lot more agreement than we have. So there's still some pretty tricky stuff to do.
New to the area.
We are going to be for the plan. What we have to do is put together a plan map and say where growth is going to go. And we have to do that soon with whatever input we have from you. And not only do we have to do that, but we have to come back with a set of policies that are consistent with that plan map and that will implement that, which probably include clear and somewhat extensive and possibly strong policies about infrastructure. We have done a lot of work on that, but it's not, as you point out, it's not in a document that we are handing to you next. The intent was to come in a couple weeks to have, to focus on that policy, get some input back from you on, is that the right policy direction? And then to be here in January with a preferred alternative, the policies that you've given us direction on, and at that point, that's where we would be. So, and what I heard was, I get the strong, on the one hand, we need to have a draft, understood. On the other hand, can we really get a good draft? And if we push too hard to get a draft and say we have to be done with it, are we going to have anything worthwhile? So there's a tension there. I'm not going to try to resolve it now. I'm just going to say we're going to be working on that. And we'll be coming back to you with what we can deliver by when.
Is the public, as far as this public input and feeding into the draft, so how many opportunities have the public had to opine, give input so far?
In terms of what's important to them and
Yeah.
growth in the region.
Yeah.
So we actually have a presentation from Nate, excuse me, it's getting late. We have a presentation from Nate that actually describes that pretty comprehensively.
No, but I mean, have they had 5 or 1, or this is the first big one coming up, or?
Sure. So I think one of the things to know about that is there's many different ways to engage the community.
Right, I mean, what I'm saying is, just like we have with our master plan, there's this open sort of electronic commentating period. But in terms of how many times have they been presented as something like this? Is this going to be the first one?
This will be the first large one like this.
Yeah.
We went out and asked for engagement around the importance
Right.
and what issues folks had. And that we went to 42 discrete meetings
Sure.
to ask for that input around that. And
Yeah.
also, but we got the most information back electronically.
The online?
Yep.
Yeah, so but
It's
after
online
the
to get
5th, you'll kind of have that big one thing. And I guess where it gets hard for the public really to get involved with these kind of maps. That it's a lot easier for people to react with something, and that's all they're saying. Is
And the development community, in my mind, looking back to 2006, is they came in late. They came in late, they were looking at maps, they were hiring attorneys, they were, you know, they want to see it there because they're looking at their land. I mean, so let's get that out, and then maybe if we need to take out that for another period, we can compress this now, maybe, you know, do the work with us, get to the draft, and then do that. And, you know, they can always come to these meetings. They start to get the idea that things are moving, they'll be here. Jim Nadeau was here, I don't see him, but he was here. The realtors are here, you know, so.
Okay, so.
And I welcome that.
I think we got it where, Nate, if you're ready to go, let me, 2 things before Nate starts. Maybe 3, because Kim has something, go ahead.
So really quickly, I think I'm going to poll the room and see if you want a conversation around communication and engagement. It's really a review of what we have already done. This is something that was asked for by the chair to be put on this agenda. So it's a review of everything that we've done, and then also a discussion around what I just shared with you. So I think it's possible Nate's off the hook. It's also in your
With
packet.
no disrespect to Nate, I'm comfortable with everything that's happened so
Yeah.
far.
Yeah. Just put it in our email box.
That's what I was going to say.
Put it on the report, there you go.
Okay.
Presentation.
Good job.
Thanks, Nate.
If you like that, you're going to like this too.
Great.
We've also decided that the part that you have in your notes, the detailed part from Mike Gleason, Mike did more in the introductory part than we thought he would. And I think he left on a high note, so we're going to keep him there. And not bring him back to get into the details of some of this other stuff. We've been working on that. And then the last thing I want to say, and I'll turn it over to Kim, is we do have to create, to get a plan done, we have to have a plan map that we are writing around. And what we are picking up from today, I mean, we didn't ask you to say exactly what it should be, but we asked for some direction. I think we got some direction, but I can tell you that important to us as we laid out the NRS and in our criteria, I mean, the NRS is clear about going to older neighborhoods first. It has the words infill, it has stuff like that. When we start looking at those kind of things, it does not lead us, obviously, to scenario 1. So, you know, we're kind of looking at something that is going to be some kind of, you know, amalgam of 2, 3, and 4 that seems to operate best. And that's, I think, where we're likely to head on this in order to you know, get a preferred alternative together.
So
yeah.
one final piece I want to reiterate, the offer to come to the office. We'll make time available to sit down and go through these. We're happy to do them individually or in 2s and 3s. I think it's really important to do that. We're happy to do that. And I know that we have to finish up the agenda, Mr. Chair.
Do we have any public comment?
Yes, we have one. Sharon Korn.
Excuse me, she left earlier. She
Okay.
left.
Kimberly. What are those dates of coming to the office?
We can arrange those with you.
Oh, I
We're
thought it
very
was when
flexible.
Terry's back again, coming back.
No,
in a
no,
week
no.
or so.
Nope.
This
Okay.
is down term.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, seeing no further business, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Got a motion? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you, have a good night.
Need a motion to adjourn the planning commission.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you.
That's right, yeah.
Jessica, that was legit, okay? I counted.